Okay, well, we'll try that and see if that works. I don't know what happened or why it's doing what it's doing, but
Alright.
it seems like it's working okay, I guess.
Yep.
Default, blah, 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 blah.
Wouldn't be one of our videos if we didn't have a technical difficulty at some point.
There we go. Right? Yeah. No kidding. Okay. Well, I'm assuming we're working now. Let's give it 1 second here. Just want to make sure everything's working the way it's supposed to. Hey. Oh, that doesn't sound good. Got some rattling in here, so I'm just trying to fix that quick. Well, I'm assuming we're working now. Let's give it 1 second. Just want to make sure everything's working.
Yeah, that static is not... What could be doing that? Ugh.
Well, it popped up all of a sudden. It was fine, and now it's not, so I don't know. Got some rattling. I wish the damn thing wasn't like 20 seconds behind.
Right.
That's where we're under our problem right now. Everything's like running behind. I don't know. Sounds good. Why don't you say something, Mark?
Hello. We're talking about Space Marines today. Instead of out buying gasoline.
We're gonna try that. See how it sounds.
Alright.
Because I don't know. It was sounding fine for a minute there, and all of a sudden it's like. Right. I think it's working.
Okay.
Blah 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 blah. We'll try that. See what that sounds like.
Alright.
Sorry, guys.
But,
just working with some audio problems, so
Yep.
everything was good to go, and now all of a sudden it started causing problems again.
Yep, but we're here talking about the Space Marines, and in these faction-focused videos, we really like to cover every last detail of the books, so that we don't skip over a thing, and just, we include everything. With Space Marines, that's going to be pretty difficult. We'd probably end up having to like make 4 videos worth, just because the book is so big. So we're probably going to have to generalize a bit here, but the army it's such a generalized army. It's good at a lot of different things, and it has so many different tools in its toolbox that you can build it almost any way you want. So I suppose we can just jump into some of the more popular chapters that people like to use for this.
Well, just recapping kind of what we were talking about before we started running these audio problems.
Yep.
Essentially, like Mars said, we're just kind of, we want to cover what we can about the Space Marines. We're going to briefly kind of skim through the chapters here, just because we don't want to like point out what the best chapters and all this and that is. Mm-hmm. That's not what we're here to focus on. We're more focusing on kind of things about the Army as a whole that we can do to, maybe shift your lists, maybe give you ideas, potentially just kind of sit and talk with people, and if anybody has any comments or questions at all, feel free to, ask in the chat or comment along, and, we'll just kind of sit and chat with people here, and Mars and I are just sitting and have a conversation about, kind of how we feel about the Army as a whole, and just things that we can do to kind of keep the Army chugging along in 9th edition, as the new codexes are released and kind of as the meta shifts. You're seeing a lot of stuff like Drakari and, Death Guard coming out. There's a lot of armies that are kind of, when Space Marines first got their codex, their new codex in 9th edition, right along with Necrons, they were kind of neck and neck in terms of like power level. But now as you're seeing, you even saw like Necrons to an extent were actually a little underwhelming just because they didn't get all the core keywords that Space Marines did. But now you're kind of seeing as other armies are coming out, Marines are starting to shift to the back end a little bit. And it's not so much that Marines are getting worse. I think it's more so that people are going to have to start playing Marines in a different manner, or taking units that they generally wouldn't take in their normal lists, to kind of like match or equal out or balance out the army against these other armies that are coming out in
Yeah,
expedition.
they definitely just have to shift their tactics a bit. Now,
Yeah.
fortunately, this is a codex that is very good at shifting tactics.
It is, yeah. This army has so much available to it that, even though, Space Marines in general, they're generally not masters of any one thing, but they're so good at covering ground on pretty much everything. And it's not like they're average at anything. They're above average on everything they do. So,
Oh, yeah.
Again, like I said, as new codexes come out, they're going to struggle for a little bit to kind of catch back up and catch their breath in terms of these new armies that are coming out. They're good or great at one particular thing or a couple different things. Where Space Marines players are just so used to taking like a pretty basic list. They know you obviously got to run your core units and stuff like that. And there's certain units that work really well in the army, but now all of a sudden these new codexes are coming out and they just completely dominate those kind of lists. You almost kind of have to focus your Marines in specific areas to be able to take on specific armies. And I mean, listing is never really the best thing to do in 40K, especially like in a tournament setting. But in terms of adjusting your army to be able to handle all kinds of threats, especially if you're seeing more threats than you did before, for instance, like Raiders being a big problem with Drakari right now. People are going to have to focus more on that. It's not just anti-tank, but it's the right kind of anti-tank to be able to take out those particular units efficiently, effectively, quickly enough to where they can, get the guys inside, stuff like that. So basically, what I'm getting at is that's the kind of stuff we want to focus on today. We want to give people a generalized idea about how the army runs, but at the same time, not focus on so much on what the weaknesses of the book is, more so on what you can do to rebalance your army to be able to play in the current editions. So,
So one thing I wanted to say is
Sure.
how the Space Marines operate is they're just a very elite, very shock and awe army. They rely very heavily on just obliterating their enemy as efficiently as possible, and they do that in range, in melee, and through just their mobility on the table. They are very much good at all forms of combat, and they very much rely on just eliminating their enemy and in the most brutal way possible.
Yeah.
Now, when the Necrons came out, it was pretty balanced because they did that job very well. They're fully capable of taking down Necrons.
Yeah.
But then Necrons just stand back up. So it's kind of a really balanced factor, and these armies matched up really well.
Yeah.
And then Death Guard came out, and they are super resilient. And all of a sudden, the Space Marines are struggling to kill their enemy a little.
Yeah.
And they're struggling to, defeat them.
And I think too, you look at the weapon types and stuff like that. Specific weapons people are so used to using, all of a sudden don't work against the new codex, and it's like, okay, well, what do I do to fix this? Or you got the other half of the other flip, the flip side of the coin, where people are like, oh, well, this stuff doesn't work now. My Marines are trash. I need to start a new army. It's like, well, no, you don't. You just have to adjust your army, adjust your lists, pick up maybe more Space Marines. Everybody loves Space Marines, so if you got a Space Marine army, get some more models, get some more units in your army.
Yep.
They're easy to build. They're baseline in terms of their costs are relatively decent. So in terms of if you're playing 40K, Space Marines are kind of the way to go because they just have so much available that you can kind of adjust whatever you need, even in a meta where they become the underdogs, they still can make up that ground in other ways. So I think Mars is onto something here in terms of
yeah. And then I was gonna say, we run into the new kids on the block, the Dark Eldar, or the Drakari.
Right.
And Space Marines, even if they couldn't outright kill their enemy, and perhaps they're too numerical, they could always rely on their power armor and their toughness and their transhuman physiology to kind of outlast their opponents.
Right.
Now, they've always been a little bit of a smaller force, so they don't have a large amount of models on the table.
Yeah.
So when things like Drakari come across, and they are able to just go all in on destroying their enemies, all of a sudden the Space Marines find themselves on their back foot almost right away. It's like, well, I've lost so many Marines right away. I don't have the endurance to outlast these guys.
Yeah, your forces get dwindled down enough to where you just can't outlast them at that point. And Drakari just have so many bodies, even though they're, the glass cannon type army, where, they aren't resilient at all, but they just have such an overwhelming amount of numbers with that quality shooting, that quality melee, which allows them to outlast most opponents. So, yeah, I totally agree. I think Marines in general, they have the tools. It's just, it comes down to building, really, I think.
Yeah.
And that's one of the most fun things about playing Space Marines. They just have so many things to build on. I can kind of be sympathetic towards Marine players to an extent because, when they see their army come out as one of the first codexes and all of a sudden their army's playing in the back foot, after a couple of codexes, it's like, oh, well, that sucks. But here's the thing is the Marines have had, 3 codexes in 2 years? 2.5 years? Something like that?
They've had 3 codexes and at least 2 editions.
Well, right. So. And I think, so they got their codex, so they had the index and then they got their codex like a year later. And then, because I think 8th edition lasted, was it 3-4 years, something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
been a little while now, but the thing is it's like, they got their codex, made them okay for a while, and then all of a sudden the power creep took over and made them bad again. Well, then Chaos 2.0 got their codex.
Yeah.
1.5, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
Well, and then all of a sudden Marines right after that came out with a codex that just dominated what Chaos Marines got. So it's like, Marine players, I get it sucks into your army to have to go, from being great to all of a sudden being like, okay, well, now I got to start playing a different way. I don't get to play the army the way I want to play it. But Marines are never the ones left in the dust. If they are sitting in a bad spot, it doesn't take long for the GW to be like, oh, okay, well, I get it. Let's go ahead and fix them. Let's boost them up a little bit so they're on par again. And frankly, there's still no army in the game that really runs the doctrines, the chapter tactics, all the buffing stuff that Space Marines get.
Oh yeah,
there's nothing in the game.
So many special rules.
There's no other armies in the game that can keep up with that kind of stuff for very long. And Drakari they do that stuff really well. They have the great initial counter to Space Marines. But, I think as time goes on, you're going to see, I think part of the reason why you're seeing a lot of Drakari players doing so well right now. I mean, the Codex is built really well to a point where it's, in some circumstances, it might actually be too strong. But you're also seeing the fact that Drakari is being played by a lot of Marine players that stop playing in the meta. Because if they're like meta chasers or whatever the case is, they stop playing Marines for a little bit, long enough to switch over to Drakari, play the good Codex for a while, and then eventually they'll switch back. So it's not like Marines are being left in the dust. So
not by any means.
All right, keep it going there, buddy.
Yep. So Marines definitely have all the tools in their book to shift to whatever meta they're fighting. Like we were talking about Necrons, we're talking about Death Guard, and we're talking about Drakari. And the real skill comes down to building a force that can really just go to a tournament and run into all 3 of those and be able to perform well against all of them. So that's the real meat of the bones that's going to separate like a new player from a experienced player is what they bring to the table. I've seen all kinds of different Space Marine armies being played. I've seen armies where they just run like 100 firstborn and very little elf. I've seen other armies where they just run like 20 Terminators, and that's their whole army. I don't personally feel either of those are very competitive, but that kind of gives you an example of how to one extreme the army can play. It can be a horde army, or it can be a super elite army, or it can be somewhere in between. It can be very tactical, it can be shooty, it can be melee, it can be all of this. And I really feel that is where the Space Marines' true power lies, is the ability to just do everything. And fit everything into your list.
Well, I think one thing to consider too that people should keep in mind is Space Marines is played by all levels of players, right?
Yes.
I mean, there are a lot of players that play other armies and stuff, but the thing is, the Space Marines is the most popular army in 40K, and because there's so many different levels of players, you kind of see, the top top level Space Marine players still do well, right? In like the tournament settings and stuff, they still win a lot of games. They still, maybe they struggle against certain armies for a little while, but they adjust, they adapt, and they get better. And all of a sudden, they're playing, on even ground for a lot of these other, whatever meta armies or whatever you want to call them.
Yep.
And then you got like the lower level players that are just starting out and playing Space Marines and stuff. These guys are inexperienced and whatnot, so you're going to see them lose a lot of Space Marine games or games where they're playing Space Marines. So you got all these different levels of players that are playing, and there's so many Space Marine players out there. I can't tell you the last time I went to a tournament where there wasn't, probably at least 40% of the armies that were there were Space Marines.
Right, right.
So it's one of those things where you got to consider it's like, yes, they may be struggling in certain areas, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're struggling. It might be more so the fact that the players playing them are taking their time adjusting or adapting or whatever the case is. So that way the Space Marine Army in general, can cover so much ground, and it has so many different ways to play. But no matter which way you do it, you have enough in your army to be able to make the army work and make it fun to play. If you want to focus Gravis, you want to focus Phobos, focus Terminators or Firstborn Marines, you can do all that and still win games. Where if you look at a lot of other codexes, namely 8th edition codexes, there's a lot of ways to play other codexes. Like we'll take for instance Eldari. Eldari have their wraiths. They have their infantry, type builds and stuff like that. And there are specific ways to play an army in those particular codexes that allow you to win games. But if you run a different kind, or if you like playing that army a different way, you cannot win games with that army because that army is just bad because of the way it's built. Space Marines don't work that way. They are able to play kind of whichever way you want to play, and you can still make them win. Yep. So, I feel like the army as a whole is still sitting in a really good spot, and I think GW did a really good job with the core stuff.
Yes.
I would have liked to see other codexes get more core stuff as well, but with that said, I agree with how the way they got it set, where every model in the army can kind of do another job. They're not locked into one particular job. Your standard Space Marine is good in combat. It's good at shooting. They got enough psychics in their army. They can do psychic phase stuff. Their movement isn't bad. They got plenty of transports in the army, so it's like they're not really lacking in any one area. And every guy, is like a Swiss Army knife. They can kind of do multiple different things, right?
They're real professional soldiers. I feel like GW has really knocked that out apart. Because in previous editions, Space Marines felt a little underwhelming, at least according to the lore. You hear about 5 Space Marines holding off entire armies, and on the tables it didn't really feel like that. In these newer editions, 8th and 9th, they have really given them a lot more special rules, and they've come out with the Primaris who have extra wounds, and you get extra attacks, and they're much more armies in a can now.
Yeah.
No, you pay a little bit of a premium for that, so your force is a little smaller, but
yeah, you do.
But they definitely feel a lot more like Space Marines on the table rather than this Imperial Guard force with power armor.
That's right. And with that said, even with that being the case, Space Marines are still cheap enough. If you run, just your core, your infantry, troops and stuff like that, and you're not focusing on elites and fast and heavy, you can field a really good size force. And they're still, maybe not super competitive, but they're still strong enough to be able to win games. And again, like I said, an army that can build however you want to build it and still be able to win, not many armies can say that. So
yeah, it's not quite the same, but when I played Black Legion, I would just bring 80 Legionnaires with me to a game and throw in some tanks, and I just dug through my enemy just because I had so much power armor on the table.
Right. Yeah. All right, so we kind of talked a little bit about our feelings in terms of how the army is in general, but we're going to talk a little bit about the chapters, kind of just kind of skim through them here a little bit. Just we're not going to talk about Space Wolves, Blood Angels, their successors, or was it Space Wolves, Blood Angels, and what was the other one?
Space. There's Raven Guard, Blood Angels, Space Wolves.
It's the 3 non-chapter compliant ones.
Who else doesn't?
Oh, Dark
compile-
Angels. That's the other one. Yeah.
Dark Angels, yes.
Yeah.
Dark
So,
Angels.
because we already did Dark Angels, right?
Yeah, Black Templar in here. Yep.
Yeah. Templar. We'll talk about like Imperial Fist, Black Templar are the successors.
Yep.
So we'll kind of skim those a little bit, but we're gonna avoid talking about like the three that are not chapter compliant, primarily because those can have their own chapter faction focuses.
Yes.
Because the armies, even though they are Space Marines, they do play differently enough to where, you're not really. You're not really playing like a Space Marines type army. You're playing,
Yeah.
Space Marines with a huge twist of
Well,
something else.
they have their own tactics. Like today, we're covering the chapters that follow the Codex
Yeah.
Astartes.
Well, and they can't even use like not the relics, the stratagems, relics, warlord traits, stuff like that. They're that stuff's not available to Space Wolves and Blood Angels and Dark Angels. So I think otherwise they're sitting in a great spot. So
Oh yeah.
all right, why don't we start with, I guess we'll talk about the chapters here. Again, we're not talking about Dark Angels.
Yep.
Let's jump right into White Scars.
Sure.
White Scars, in terms of their chapter, their whole army is designed to play fast. They, a lot of bikes. They run a lot of quick units. They do take, a fair amount of infantry as well.
Yeah.
But the army in general focuses mainly on going quick, getting up close, doing some damage, getting in combat, shredding things apart. This army is so fast that it's hard to really keep up with. And
Definitely.
it's deadly too. That's another thing. It's like not only is it fast, somewhat durable, but it is like incredibly deadly, especially up in close quarters. So White Scars, you're seeing a lot of White Scars players right now. You're seeing a lot of Blood Angels is another one that's super popular. And then Dark Angels, of course, is also pretty popular too, but I think part of that too is the new Codex.
Yeah.
But they all kind of have their own little things that they do really well. White Scars, they are Codex compliant. They fit into this basic, the standard Marine book. And because they have access to all the standard Marine stuff, in addition to their White Scar stuff, they're really actually a pretty solid army in terms of what they can do, and the fact that they shine so well with their speed. They're unlike pretty much every other army that's Codex compliant. So, do you have any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, definitely. Like with the new speeders and the new outriders that have come out, you're definitely seeing plenty of White Scars players, just because these are very phenomenal units.
Yeah.
And they fit very well into White Scars, and they're able to just move across the battlefield so fast and still put down firepower, but are ultimately trying to get into melee with you, tie you up, and grind you down. And White Scars do that really well.
They do, and it's funny because like the most durable things in a Space Marine army generally are the bikes,
Oddly enough.
the speeders and stuff like that. They're way more durable than the regular infantry, and they're taking all the stuff that's durable. But in addition to that, they're getting all these bonuses for melee, and I guess they don't really focus much on shooting, but they do. The shooting is just fine for their army.
Their bikes and spears still have guns on them.
But like Outriders, they got even attack bikes. Pretty much everything in their army is available to them still, through the use of their bikes and the use of the types of vehicles and stuff that they normally run. So it's like White Scars really don't lose anything by taking White Scars from the normal Space Marine stuff. No. So they kind of get the best of both worlds, and because this army has so much going for it, especially with 9th edition being focused on objectives as much as it is, White Scars and their speed really is kind of sets them apart from a lot of these other armies because of the fact that they're just, they're able to do what 9th edition wants them to do so well. So I think it's pretty easy to say that White Scars are going to be a pretty good mainstay for at least the more, I guess, short future. Maybe not long term, but in terms of right now and what we're kind of seeing in terms of foresight, I think you're going to see a lot of White Scars armies still sticking around. And frankly, that's a good thing, because there was a time, 7th, 6th, previous editions where White Scars were, rare if you ever saw them on the battlefield. So seeing them show up and actually do really well is actually kind of cool to see. I still think GW, and I think most people would agree with me, that Corsaro Khan was something. Corsaro Khan was great, like the release of the new model, but the fact that they didn't give a Corsaro Khan a bike, like,
why?
That is literally the reason
why
that character exists. Why is he not on a bike?
Right.
So That's GW's thing. Hopefully, eventually they'll give you guys one. But in the meantime, I guess on the bright side, at least you got to keep the bike version that's non-Primaris. So, I mean, it's better than nothing, I guess. And neither one of them are bad. They're both good. But other than that, I think the Army is solid. So
Yeah.
but
Just,
that
put them in a transport, I guess.
yeah.
Was it the
Yeah, and I
not
mean,
the Razorback, but the Incursor or whatever?
yeah, and I mean, there's ways to play him.
Yep.
Even the infantry version where he still can be effective in the games. So the bike version's probably the more popular one just because everybody wants him on a bike.
Yeah.
But with that said, it doesn't mean the melee. The infantry version is worse. It's just that you got to play him a little differently. So.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so moving into Imperial Fist, Siege Masters is their chapter tactic.
Yeah, this is the one I see people playing a lot. It's just it's a very easy chapter to use.
They were incredibly popular towards the late portion of 8th edition. A lot of that, I think, was due to the doctrines, the new Space Marine Codex coming out, how the doctrines were added on, and then the fact that they ignore cover, plus all their bolters doing was a multi-damage or multi-shots.
No,
Sixes do like extra hits or something.
Yeah, they basically get like a mini Tesla with bolt weapons.
Yeah, so when your standard weapon is AP -2,
In like the tactical
multiple
doctrine,
shots. Well, back then you got to choose your doctrine. You had to go to the first, but after that, you kind of pick which doctrine you want to be in. And when they started forcing doctrines, that's when you started seeing Imperial Fist players start to shift out of Imperial Fists, primarily because now they can no longer, do what they want to do essentially throughout a game. But it doesn't make them bad. I mean, really, it just forced the Army to play a slightly different way. And I think a lot of people that played against Imperial Fists would probably agree that, to an extent, some of that stuff that they had, the way they did play, was almost too strong. And it was very oppressive. It was hard to play against them. I think, and I'm just saying this from experience. I played Grey Knights long enough to where I feel very comfortable playing the Army, and I feel I'm pretty decent at it. I was playing Grey Knights in 8th edition, and even though they were one of the worst armies, further towards the end of the edition, after they got Psychic Awakening, they became pretty good again. But even then, we did a tournament, and I had gone, what was it, like 3-0 or 2-0 or something like that at the start of the tournament. And then the very last game, I got stuck against an Imperial Fist player, and I lost over half my army in a single turn. And part of it was due to my deployment, because back then the role to go first, I was already determined. Yep. So I was under the impression I was going first, and of course he rolls a 6 and steals the initiative, and now all of a sudden he's going first. So that kind of threw me off, and that's part of the reason why the game went as fast as it did. But losing an entire half of a Grey Knight force in a single turn is almost unheard of, even for today's standards of 40K.
Yeah.
So it was crazy how strong Imperial Fists were, especially how strong Centurions and what was the other one that they had? Aggressors.
Yes.
So those two units were super oppressive. It was just really hard to keep up with them. So I don't know. I feel like Imperial Fists, they definitely took a hit with the new edition. Some of their stuff has changed, and to a point where a lot of Imperial Fists, I think people have almost completely abandoned Imperial Fists. But I still think that the Army is, as a whole, it's still good enough to play in this edition.
Yes.
Maybe I would like to see a little change to where they can still match up with the other armies a little better. I should say the other chapters a little better. But I still feel like the Army can be played, and their characters and stuff are still good enough, and they're still Space Marines. So it's
oh yeah.
Yeah, they're not like today's fast Space Marines like the White Scars that can max out in points every game, but it doesn't mean that you can't run Imperial Fists and still do fine, because you can. You really can. So
I'd agree. The 9th edition has really shifted so that the Imperial Fists are not quite dominating as much as they were.
Right.
They're very much, they feel like a gunline army. So they get additional hits on rolls of 6s with bolt weapons, which for Space Marines is a lot of stuff. You got your bolters, your heavy bolters, your storm bolters, you got your bolt carbines. Everything just has like bolt in it. So it was almost every weapon that you would bring to the table would get this benefit.
Right.
And it was really impressive because out of every 6 shots, you'd get an additional hit.
Right.
You would just get that little extra firepower that you were really looking for, and then you don't even get cover against these.
Right. Yeah, they just strip cover altogether.
They just kind of shot you off the table.
Yeah.
Now in 9th edition, and especially with Space Marines, how they function as a whole, I don't feel Imperial Fists are necessarily fighting the way that Space Marines should be. Like I said, they're a gun line.
Yeah.
Now Space Marines should be shooting when they're coming at you, but they should ultimately be moving at you, trying to get in melee, trying to get on objectives, trying to score points and eliminate you.
Yeah.
The Imperial Fists, it fits their lore, which is just the defensive masters.
Right.
But
Siegers.
Siegers too. They just they're playing this kind of siege warfare that just really isn't going to score you a lot of points in 9th edition.
Yeah, it's not what 9th edition really wants you to do. Again, like I said, claiming objectives and being really fast in tabletop, being able to like remobilize your army to another side of the board. That's a lot of what 9th edition really wants people to do. And Imperial Fists, it's not that they don't have that stuff, it's that people that generally play Imperial Fists don't run that kind of stuff in their armies.
Yep.
But what's interesting is like you go back and look at like naturally Imperial Fists generally aren't a melee army. But you look at Targaradon, he's the only model in the entire game with a ×3 strength weapon. Like he's got a power fist that's ×3 strength. Like
there's no one else.
There's nothing else in the game that has that. So it's like they still have some melee, and like you can take intercessor squads, which everybody was running like Stalker Bolt squads, I think, for the most part.
The Stalker Bolt or something.
And then they would take their sergeant with a Thunderhammer or a Power Fist, and they were still good in melee. So it's like, okay, well, they're good at everything still. You know, even though they prefer to shoot, they can melee just fine too. So I think as a whole, Imperial Fists still play the game just fine. They still can play 9th edition. It's just that I think a lot of the ways people want to build Imperial Fists, and a lot of the ways, like, I guess if you play like based off of the way their lore wants them to play, they don't play 9th edition as well as some of the other chapters. But it doesn't necessarily mean they can't do it. They can just, just like a lot of Blood Angels lists nowadays, they can still shoot, and the melee can come second. That's just like added bonuses. Where like Imperial Fists are the other way around, where they can still do the movement, they can still do the melee stuff. But like the shooting bonuses are just kind of secondary. They're just addition to what they get. So
a good way to describe the Space Marines is just like when you're designing a main battle tank. You need three different aspects. You need mobility, you need protection, and you need firepower.
Right.
And I feel Space Marines are at their best, just like a main battle tank, when they have all three in a balanced amount.
Right.
Because when you start adding to one, you take away from the other two. And a good example of the Imperial Fists is they kind of add in so much into firepower that they take away from the other two. And that's what's causing an issue here in 9th edition. The same can be true of like White Scars. They kind of emphasize into mobility, and they might sacrifice a little bit of like firepower and survivability when they do that. With that being said, they do very good at getting on objectives, and especially your opponent's objectives.
That's right.
Yeah, so that's really the trick to, I feel, the Space Marines, is just balancing those three aspects very well.
Right.
I think we're moving on to Crimson Fists here, which are basically...
Well, they're the Imperial Fist successor, yeah.
Yep.
They're the first of the two primary successors for them.
Yep.
Crimson Fists, look, they're a whole nother Space Marine army, pretty much all on its own. It's not, there's nothing like that makes them super different from the rest of the Space Marines. And they still have access to all the Imperial Fist stuff, which is what makes them so good. Because they have the Crimson Fist stuff and they have the Imperial Fist stuff available to them. It's quite interesting to be able to, put together a list and be able to, utilize this army with a character, that's not really designed in the Imperial Fist manner. And their chapter tactics don't play like the Imperial Fist chapter tactics want them to play. So they're able to do that other stuff that we were talking about and still be able to, kind of represent Imperial fists, I guess would be the word I'd use. They still kind of fit that same doctrine, I guess, that Imperial fists are looking for. So it's cool how they have set it up. So as a successor chapter, they're not like your random successors where you can pick up like the different, pick from a couple different rules and have this and that and this and that, and then you can also throw in some other stuff from Imperial Fists. I mean, Crimson Fists are Crimson Fists. They're their own thing, but they have enough integration with the Imperial Fists mother chapter that they're still able to kind of play on both ends really well. And they integrate better than, like, say, for instance, the Black Templars. Templars being another successor. Templars, just their affiliation with Imperial Fists is just the fact that they came from Imperial Fists. In terms of how they play the game, in terms of how their army works, they're completely separate. Where Crimson Fists still kind of play alongside with Imperial Fists very well. So they're, they're a good chapter, and I think you don't see a whole lot of them, primarily just because of the fact that the founding chapters tend to be more popular.
Yeah.
Or like the random successors, people want to paint their own schemes and stuff like that. Those tend to be more popular as well. So it's not that there's anything wrong with Crimson Fist. That's just kind of how they are.
Yep.
So.
Then the other successor chapter is the Black Templars. So
Yeah.
they don't follow the Codex Astartes. They have kind of their own tactics.
Yeah.
But they're still in this book, and they can still have access to all the same stratagems.
Yeah.
Do they still have their like mixed units where they can have scouts intermixed in?
So yeah, they still have neophytes and they're Crusaders squads. They're like mix of neophytes and
The Firstborn.
I forget what they're called. It's neophytes and something else. But anyway, they have the data sheet where you can take both, and it's basically like a scout and Space Marines, and obviously you get benefits from taking both together. But the problem is that nobody runs them in full squads. They run them in min squads because that's the way you play 9th edition. Maxing squads generally isn't the best idea in a lot of cases. But it doesn't mean they can't. They're still fine if they play, full squads of Crusaders. Another thing to consider, too, is the fact that they're Firstborn Marines. And Primaris tend to be the more popular Marines right now, too.
Yes.
So you don't see them quite as much. But it doesn't mean they can't be played, So, but Templars as a whole, in general, they're one of, they're probably not the strongest chapter out there. But they were winning tournaments. They were doing pretty well.
I definitely do like their chapter tactic.
And frankly, they aren't bad by any means. They reroll advance and charges.
Yep.
And then in addition to that, they get a 5-up feel no pain against mortal wounds.
Yep.
Which doesn't seem like much at first, but
we've seen it on the channel. Like Czar can get the same thing, and that has saved me against the Thousand Suns.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many times I've taken Grimaldus and running his 2 little icon dudes that follow him, or 3 little icon dudes that follow him around. And with those guys just being around and giving the whole army a 4-up feel no pain against mortal wounds, because they give a +1 to that extra save. As long as you can keep them protected, that whole 4-up feel no pain all of a sudden becomes almost kind of ridiculously strong. Yep. It's not a normal feel no pain, but like psychic powers just bounce off you.
Explosions, like bombs.
A lot of weapons that normally would do mortal wounds.
Sniper wounds. Yep.
And that stuff, like I said, it just bounces off your models like it's no big deal. So, while it's not the mortal wounds is still kind of a rare thing in the game. It's not that it's like rare, but it's not as
uncommon,
plentiful as like your standard shooting, your standard melee stuff like that. But there's enough of it out there, especially nowadays, to where Black Templars can utilize this second half of their chapter tactic.
Oh, yeah.
But another thing to consider too is they have that little supplement deal that they got going for them. I think. God, was that Faith and Fury? I believe it was.
I believe so.
It was Ritual. Yeah, it was Faith and Fury because Grey Knights is Ritual of the Damned and Dark Angels is Ritual of the Damned. So yeah, Faith and Fury. They have their old little section or whatever of updated rules. Now, of course, that was updated in the FAQ, but they got all their basic stuff that they got in Faith and Fury. So they're able to be able to take stuff that actually their army does really well. They're still limited to not being able to take Psychers, which kind of sucks, but. It's just a Templar thing. But beyond that, though, they love chaplains. So it's like, instead of librarians, I'll just spam chaplains. That's not a problem for them. So they also get one of the best chaplains in the game, when Grimaldus, and I'm sure we would all love to see brand new, like a new Helbrecht, new Grimaldus, new Emperor's Champion, but, you know, even being firstborns, they're still all really powerful. And I think, you know, they make the army like really iconic and fun to play. So Templar have a specific way of playing, and they like using firstborns more than Primaris, but it doesn't mean they can't use Primaris either. And you know, they integrate just fine into the army. But if you're like a hardcore Black Templar player, a lot of those Templar players just love taking their firstborn Marines. So it's kind of funny because it's almost like Templar are sort of a throwback army. Where if you look at all the other chapters, a lot of them now, like, you know, they love Primaris integration. Where you look at Templar and they're like, yeah, we don't need that.
We don't.
It's not that they can't take it. It's just like
We got scouts.
it's like we're fine without it. So, you know, another thing to look at too is the updates to all the firstborn Marines. You know, the added second wound and you know all the stuff that they've added into the firstborn Marines. Now they're good enough to where you can take them, you know, instead of Primaris and still perform just fine. And frankly, you're actually saving a few points on certain models. Because Marines are still, you know, firstborn Marines are still cheaper than your Primaris Marines. So
yeah, I think the only difference now is like one less attack, and you can't use like certain stratagems. But otherwise, they're very comparable to each other.
Yeah, and you know they love Terminators. Terminators are comparable to most units in the army nowadays. Vanguard veterans are another one where they're really good. You know, especially the Lightning Claws ones. So frankly, you get a lot by running Templars the way they want to be ran. The one trade-off you don't get is the fact that the Land Raider, and we'll get to this later down the road once we get to data sheets, but the Land Raider is still kind of suffering a little bit. And Templar is just so iconic to run Templar in the Land Raider. They love it. That's why they got a stratagem for it. But it doesn't mean you can't run the Land Raider. It doesn't mean you can't run the army without the Land Raider. Templar can run. They just love infantry, really. That's what it comes down to. You know,
They do.
Just bodies and bodies and bodies. Going crusading. They love it. So. Templar, I think, are a solid army. We do have them here in the studio. Obviously, we'll get them on the channel at some point, but you know, it's another project for another day kind of deal. But yeah, they're an army that I think is pretty solid, just like Crimson Fist. The only thing that they don't have going for them that Crimson Fist does is the fact that Crimson Fist has an updated lord, a new character. They got their Primaris model or whatever for them, right?
Did they? Did they get Primaris?
I think they Primaris. Didn't they make their new chapter or chapter master Primaris or something like that?
Not that I recall.
Well, maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, it's possible.
I'm probably mistaken, but I don't think he was upgraded.
No, maybe not. I don't know. But I know that Helbrecht still, you know, kind of sitting in the metal model scheme or the fine cast, which is unfortunate. But even with that said, I mean, the only thing they really have that they're missing is the fact that they can't integrate with Imperial Fists. They don't benefit from any of the stuff Imperial Fist gets. So it's not the end of the world for them. They do just fine without the Imperial Fist stuff. There was a point there where GW kind of made a mistake and they didn't really, you know, flesh it out very well back in 8th edition. And you could run both Black Templar and Imperial Fist stuff, and they could take everything from both books. And it was just way too much. So GW put a kibosh on that pretty quick, for good reason. So.
Yep.
All right, so that covers the Imperial Fist section.
Now we're into Blood Angels, but we're going to do them separately.
Yeah, we're going to do a different faction focus for both Space Wolves, Blood Angels. Flesh Terrors are a successor of the Blood Angels, so we'll skip on those too. But those are another common army you see is Blood Angels, being the Space Marines, Dark Angels, and White Scars. Those three are like the mainstay right now. So let's get into Iron Hands and talk about that.
Yeah, Iron Hands. So they are one of those armies that are very different. So we were talking about like Black Templars. They love their infantry, and they can really just kind of win the day on that grounds. Iron Hands definitely go a bit of a different route. Now, you can still have much infantry in this army if you really want, but generally what you see is a bunch of dreadnoughts and vehicles and tech marines. They go a lot more mechanized in their armies, which is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a valid list. But yeah, they have a very kind of different tactic from the others that they bring to the battlefield.
It is, yeah.
So they all have a chance to ignore the loss of a wound on a roll of 6.
Yeah. 6 of feeling pain's pretty good.
And then they treat all their damage characteristics as being double in the terms of like vehicles.
Yep.
So when they degrade, they count as
They don't
double.
bracket very quickly.
Yep.
It's very, very difficult to bracket them
Yep.
effectively. You can't rely on whittling their wounds down. You got to kill their stuff, or you're just going to be getting hit hard all game long. So, Iron Hands is an army where, well, let's look at 8th edition. I mean, 8th edition, when they came out with the new codex, and then they came out with all the new rules for them in 8th edition, they were unbelievably strong. Like,
Well, they just had a few things going for them that were just broken.
Yeah.
Just absolutely broken.
yeah. Well,
And now GW fixed it.
Well, it took, what, 2 or 3 nerfs to
Yep.
finally get them fleshed out to a point where they didn't
They-
feel so unbelievably powerful.
They were
When
so durable.
The biggest problem was the Dreadnought characters and the Leviathan.
Yup.
That half damage stratagem.
Yup.
And then the fact that you'd had, like, that one other, the stratagem where your basic Marines could bodyguard for your character Dreadnought.
Yes.
Like, what was GW thinking?
It was
why
like-
was that ever a thing?
It was trying to deal with like drones and riptides, but even worse because they're Space Marines.
Yeah. The durable bodies,
The-
10 in a unit that could all bodyguard for a single, like a Dreadnought of all things. Why would you ever make a rule where you could bodyguard for a durable unit like that? That's nuts.
The army was so durable. It took
Oh.
multiple strikes from a Nerf bat to finally kill the thing.
Well, in addition to that, too, it's not like the units were expensive either. Like, they were still cheap. Like,
They're the same price as all the other Space
I
Marines.
mean, they were
but
expensive cost. You
They
know,
were
in terms-
just a
yeah.
lot more durable because
Yeah.
of the special rules they got.
Yeah, it was too much, and I think GW saw that, but it took them too long to adjust it.
Yep.
To where the new edition came around, it was like, okay, well, at this point, we gotta stop messing around with these guys. We're gonna cut them off. They changed the rules enough to where Iron Hands don't feel oppressive anymore.
Nope.
What's weird though is that I think I went from seeing a bunch of Iron Hands or successor Iron Hands to not seeing any. I haven't seen any since 9th edition.
Which is weird because they're not a bad army.
Well, I think part of it is because a lot of players realized just how strong it was and didn't want to, like, they were getting so much flack for
Yeah.
playing it.
Yeah.
Where all of a sudden they're like, okay, I'm out. I don't want to deal with this nonsense anymore. People won't even play me anymore. It was kind of like the whole Taudar thing where, like, it was just so strong people didn't even want to see it on the tabletop.
Yep.
Jakari are becoming like that too, where, like, people are seeing them and they're just like, gross. I didn't want to play that army. We're done. So, Iron Hands, I feel like we're at that point, and it's weird because the army had actually sat at the bottom of the totem pole for the chapter in terms of chapter play
Yep.
for so long that when they got the rules and it made them good, they literally became the only Marine army people wanted to play.
Yeah.
And then
There were like tournaments where 30% of the players were just Iron Hand players.
yeah,
Just Iron Hands. Not even just Space Marines, Iron Hands.
right. And then all of a sudden they fell off a cliff. I think the only army that I've seen that's been Iron Hand successor, we have one guy in our group named Adam who actually he plays Sons of Medusa,
Sons of Medusa,
which is a successor of the Iron Hands, and he's been religiously playing them kind of since way
Yeah,
back when.
so he's been playing them for so long, and he's been chugging through the trenches like, oh, I'm kind of playing this
Yeah.
little subpar chapter.
Yeah.
And then the day came, and even he was like, this is too good.
Yeah.
I don't like this. Like, hooray, I'm finally good. But this is weird.
Yeah.
So they got hit with a Nerf bat a couple times, and now they're still in a really good position, but we're just not seeing them. And I don't know if it's just like
I think
kind
it's-
of a backlash. Like
I
you
think
said.
I think a lot of it is, there's the one side where, like, they were too strong, people just didn't want to play them anymore, and then there was the other side where, like, now that they've taken the nerfs a couple of times to make them more balanced out, there's other armies that people are taking advantage of certain things in their armies or their particular chapters to where people just don't feel like Iron Hands are worth taking anymore. But my problem with all these, like, the chapter rules and stuff is, like, when GW comes out with them, there's certain ones that play better for certain editions. And it's so sad to see, like, people who were, like, loyal to their chapters at one point are all of a sudden like, oh, well, I'm going to go play this chapter instead because they're stronger right now. It's like, come on, guys, stick to your chapters.
Yeah.
Play
Play to your strengths.
Play the things you love to play. Don't worry so much about, the competitive aspect of it unless you're getting into, competitive tabletop gaming, which is a whole other world, really, altogether. Where, that kind of stuff is totally acceptable. But, like, casual games, there's no reason for you to just switch out to a different chapter just because, they're better. I mean, yeah, it's fun to kind of dabble in that stuff now and then, but I think it's more healthy for the game for people to just kind of stick with what they love, and not worry so much about winning and losing, because Marines, they win even when they are bad. You know what I mean? So like,
Yep.
they even when they're at their low, they're still fine. They're better than other armies. So it's like
I said, just bring 100, firstborn. You'll be fine.
yeah, and I mean we don't want to tell people how to play, but
No.
at the same time, it's like this whole game is really about like what you love about the hobby. It's what do you love the modeling? Do you love the building? Do you love the painting? Do you love the gaming portion of it?
Yeah.
Like and so, for everybody there's a different thing that they love about the game. But the thing is like stick to what you love. Don't worry so much about I mean everybody's got a competitive edge that loves playing the game to an extent, but like don't let it go overboard. Kind of stick to still playing the things that you started the game for, right?
Like I was saying earlier, we with the Necrons, we got plenty of different dynasties on the channel to kind of show them off and see what the Necrons are capable of.
Yeah.
But I was just telling Rick earlier, like I want to next time I get my Necrons out there, I want to play my own custom dynasty,
Right.
Because I really have this kind of like lore around my army and
Yeah.
how they function on the battlefield, and I want to bring that to the tabletop because it's fun for me.
Yeah.
Do that little bit of narrative.
Yeah, and that's really what Games Workshop is trying to do. They're trying to get people to play their army the way they want to play, and that's why you keep seeing like certain armies that are underdogs all of a sudden get this big buff because they're just non-existent on the tabletop. But the problem is a lot of times GW overdoes it, and then they become the only army played, and then all of a sudden GW's like, oh, we got to give them the Nerf hammer. So
Yep.
it's a game of cat and mouse, and you see highs and lows and everything. But on the upside, at least Games Workshop is doing it enough to where you're consistently seeing the meta change, and armies are shuffling through. So you're seeing armies that are unplayed show back up again. And even if they're only good for 6 months or whatever, then all of a sudden they're back in the bottom. Eventually they'll rotate back around. It's as in the past, where like I started back in 2001, and when I started, like there were certain armies that were real good, and for years they were untouched.
Yeah, for years.
Where the armies that were bad were just bad. They were stuck being bad. Sorry, too bad. You're stuck with the bad rules. It's like, all right, well. I still love playing 40K, so I'm going to keep playing my army, but GW has gotten to a point where they're rotating stuff around to where everybody gets at least a little bit of time to play with the stuff they like playing with, and it being good enough to where they don't feel like, the army never gets an opportunity to be decent. So you look at Tau, for example, like I think there's only been 2 editions where they've actually been bad.
They've
recently
been on both sides of the fence.
The end of 5th edition, they were terrible. They're bad right now, but Tau have had their time in the sunlight. Several editions in a row, even. So you're kind of seeing that as the armies are rotating through. They're good for a while, then they go back to kind of not the greatest, or maybe not played them as much as other armies, but they're still making the rotations enough to where people at least get an opportunity to play and still be good for a while. So that's good to see.
All right, so kind of inclusion. Iron Hands are still in a good position. Just ignoring 1 in every 6 wounds is just we're still really solid.
Well, if I recall correctly, their doctrine bonus, they still get the reroll 1s for vehicles, right? So I think their doctrine bonus still gives them the reroll 1s for vehicles. I think it might be a little more limited than it was before, but the army still has all of its great things about it and plays just fine. So Iron Hands, I think they're in a good enough spot to where, if you want to start Iron Hands and you like their lore, you like their chapter master, you like, I shouldn't say chapter master, I'm sorry.
You like your vehicles?
They don't specifically have a chapter master. They have, a bunch of iron, what do they call, iron priests or iron...
Tech priests?
No, they have they're like iron something.
Tech
it's whatever...
iron...
I want to say iron priests, but it's Iron Fathers. There we go.
Yeah.
So they have their group of Iron Fathers. There's no real one chapter master, but it's kind of like with Grey Knights where they got one that kind of just he's the leader of the rest of them for a while. But if you like that, if you like the fact, Ferris Madness, if you like his lore, granted he's only a headless body now, but even then, he's still got some pretty cool lore. He's a great character in terms of the past and all that. So if you like all that about him, Iron Hands is still a great army to play.
They get along with Admech real well.
Yeah.
And they're kind of real buddy chum-chums.
Sure, yeah. And the army plays well on the tabletop still, so it's like, don't let the nerfs that they've taken discourage you from playing them, because those nerfs were given for good reasons, and none of them none of what they got was hard enough to not want to play the army.
No.
It was just enough to where
it didn't knock them down to
the competitive players were like, yeah. Well, the competitive players were like, yeah, I'm going to move to a more competitive army, and then the other, again, on the flip side of the coin, was the people who had played Iron Hands were
like Adam.
Were unable to pick up games because nobody wanted to play against them. That's the other reason why you're not seeing them as much. But I think there's still good reason to want to play them, because you go back and look at them now, and they're in a spot where you don't see them on the tabletop as much anymore. But you can put them on the table and they'll still be good in games. They just won't be so oppressive that games are not fun.
Yeah.
One of our group, Cade. Everybody's seen Cade out on the channel, obviously.
Yeah. Who's Cade?
Cade, yeah. Who's Cade? Cade actually started Iron Hands like a month before Iron Hands got their 8th edition portion of the Codex.
That's right.
And he played every game with like a list that was not even designed to be strong. It was intentionally like a bunch of just random trash Marine stuff put on the table.
Yep.
And he never lost a game. And there's a good reason they got the nerfs they did, because that kind of gameplay should not exist in 40K. It makes it no fun for people. Nobody wants to play against you when you can't lose a game, even with garbage.
I remember that. He was just like dabbling with Space Marines. It's like a little side project. And he's like, oh, well, I can bring a couple dreadnoughts, and I got a couple guys. And then they dropped the new book for him, and it's like, oh, okay, this army's now OP. Yeah. It's like, this is my side project.
Yeah, they were no fun to even play against. And I firsthand, we had to witness just how strong they were. When 6 broadsides, shooting everything they can into a Redemptor, cannot even dent a Redemptor.
In my games against them, like, I would just ignore the dreadnoughts. I would just ignore them. I'm like, I'm just gonna play the objectives. Yeah, that's all I can do.
Yeah, it was unbelievable how strong some of their stuff was. So, yes, they did get nerfs, but the nerfs were fair nerfs. They were reasonable, and the army's fine. The army still plays really well, and in some cases actually is stronger than some of the other codexes or other chapters at certain things. Yeah.
So they didn't get knocked down to the kiddie table by any means. They just got taken from OP to good.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so moving into Ultramarines. Here's another one you see. I shouldn't say you see a lot of, but they're still pretty prominent in the meta. They're still pretty prominent on the tabletop, but you see them more so as like either Ultramarines or a mix of Ultramarines and successors. Yeah. Because Ultramarines stuff all have great things in Ultramarines. Mm-hmm. It's just that people tend to play successors to be able to shift their army according to how they want to play more often. And Ultramarines have everything going for them. They're great at everything. Yeah,
well, they get +1 leadership, and then they can always fall back and shoot at a -1 to hit.
Yeah, and that's never nothing to scoff at in 40K. When you can fall back and shoot, even with a -1 to hit.
Even your Land Raider can just back up and shoot.
Yeah, your whole army is able to kind of continuously keep shifting around. And 9th edition, granted, they're not the fastest army in the world, but, they can still take stuff that's mobile enough. And when your whole army is not locked into one spot or suffers penalties for being able to do what it needs to do throughout the game. Well, what I mean is, you're not stuck not being able to shoot because you fell back.
Exactly.
You can still fall back, do your shooting, and still, claim that objective, move behind cover, whatever you need to do in order to be able to still make your army work. And they're not limited to, having to choose one or the other. They get both.
Yep.
So, even with that -1 to hit, when you reroll, ones on everything, it's like, all right, well, no big deal. So, and it's not like Marines ballistic or weapon skills bad either. -1 is nothing to them.
No. You go to a 4-up, and then you're next to your chapter master because you fell back into range. Now you get to reroll your hits.
Yep.
That's perfectly fine.
Throw Gilliman on the table, and you're rerolling hits of 1, wounds of 1. Yeah, it's pretty good. So, well, they get some other cool stuff too. They get I think there's a stratagem that allows them and 2 or 3 other units maybe it's 3 units in total, something like that, where they get to all of a sudden Overwatch on 5s. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like wow,
Yep.
that's crazy good. They're all of a sudden, overwatching like Tau in close,
Yep.
at close proximity. And their firepower is better than Tau firepower in Overwatch. So, frankly, it's not a big deal for them.
Yeah, so the Ultramarines are a really good one because they can remain very tactical. They can't get bogged down by their enemy. They're always fighting on their terms.
Right. Yep.
And +1 leadership is always good too because, oddly enough, Space Marines have some mediocre leadership in this edition.
I mean, they're suffering more from leadership problems than they have in the past. It's not so much that the leadership's bad. It's more so the fact that there's a lot of things that can reduce leaderships. They're
Chukari.
only in depth. No, not only in depth. It's and they shall know no fear has been changed enough to where it's not like, okay, well, I auto pass. If I fail, well, all of a sudden I get to re-roll that. Now you're really starting to struggle with like, okay, well, things actually can affect Marines and make them fail morale. But when you got +1 leadership and you got Gilliman running around and
definitely
ancients
helps.
and stuff like that are all given +1 leadership. Now you're running around with your basic guys leadership 9, leadership 10.
Yep.
It's like, holy cow.
So I've definitely been seeing Space Marines, especially on this channel, like failing leaderships, which they normally didn't really do because they had their rerolls.
Yeah, in the past you never really saw them fail.
You never really saw them fail, but now they are. They're kind of rolling that bad roll. And, it's only like 1 or 2 Space Marines that you'll lose because they're only over failing by just a little bit. Right. And that, like, +1 leadership can really make and break the difference.
That's true, yeah. It really can. Especially with so many things nowadays that are coming out that have negative leadership. You look at Night Lords are great at it. Harlequins can drop leadership. I should say Eldari. Drakari drop leadership as well. There's a lot of armies out there that can reduce leadership, and when you got leadership bonuses and stuff like that, being able to stick around on the board is a big deal, especially when your army's almost entirely objective secured with stuff like Rights of War and whatever else they get. So, yeah, Ultramarines is a solid chapter. They're probably the most generalized chapter in terms of like what they do well, because they do pretty much everything really well.
Yep.
But they're not like a specific focus on one thing over another. Not like Blood Angels where everything's all melee for them, and then they can do shooting, they can do, the durability and the mobility and stuff like that. They just, Ultramarines kind of do everything pretty well.
The durability, firepower, and mobility.
Yeah. So Ultramarines are a great one, and that's why they're the poster boys of 40K.
Yeah. The courageous of them all.
Yeah. So
Said no one ever.
right. Yeah.
There's a bit of stigma around the Ultramarines.
Well, yeah, they get a lot of flack, and there's reasons behind it. Let's not mention, the whole Matt Ward lore and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
it is what it is. So, all right, moving into Salamanders.
Salamanders. Now that's a popular one. There
Sally's-
are some very dedicated Salamander players.
Yeah, Sallies have really gotten, especially in more recent editions, have gotten really popular. I think they've always kind of, as a general, I think most people liked Salamanders. It's very hard to find somebody that just outright hates Salamanders, and it's primarily because of the way their lore works, where they don't necessarily fight for humanity, but they fight. They're more mindful of human life than other chapters are, especially in Nocturne, which is their homeworld. So Salamanders have that stigma of being like, well, they're the good guys in 40K, especially when you compare them to other Marine armies. They kind of fit that mold as like the actual, they actually care about people. They're the big fluffy teddy bears. But they are nasty. They are just a nightmare on the board in terms of what they can do.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider some of their stuff like Flamers, Meltas. They get bonuses for all sorts of great stuff. This army as a whole is very solid. It's very well rounded. They tend to focus more on short, especially most Salamanders players, they tend to focus more on short range stuff.
Short range firepower.
And their mobility isn't like super great, but just like other Marines, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with their mobility. And if they want to tech into more mobility stuff, they have the options to do so. So it's not like, they're missing out on anything. It's just that their army loves to focus on the more short-range, slower stuff.
It's the specific weapons. They love their flamers. They love their meltaguns. They love, what's the other one?
Well,
but those specific weapons that have a relatively short range, but are very deadly at that range.
Yeah. Well, and they, hammers and other things they have a lot of, so, when they do get into combat, they're just absolute nightmare beat sticks. You got their characters are all pretty good for the most part. I think the the Compendium for Forgeable, when that came out, they did do a little bit of nerf to, what's his face? The Dreadnought. Brayarth Ashmantle, he got a little bit of a nerf. But Brayarth, he was great in 8th edition, and I think he's still relatively good. It's just that, he took a little bit of a hit, so you don't see him as much anymore. But with that said, everything in the Salamander's army is still super strong. They got a new Primaris character. They still have their what's his name? Vulcan Histan.
Yeah.
So they still got Vulcan Histan, which is the whatever father. He's the dude with a spear. And these are three of Vulcan's relics or something like that.
Yeah, he's got like this dragon cloak and.
So yeah, he's great and all. He buffs up a lot of the stuff that Salamanders like to do. They get like reroll wounds and +1s to wounds and stuff like that, and with all the meltas and flamers and all sorts of great stuff. So the army as a whole is a nightmare up close. But they do everything still really well.
Oh, yeah.
Just like any other Space Marine army, really. So there's just certain things that they like more than others. So.
Yep. You definitely see the army very generalized towards those weapons, like we said. But their chapter tactic and tactics as a whole don't really lock them into any one thing.
Yeah. Well, and their durability is absurd too for a Space Marine army.
Well, yeah, because their chapter tactic, they ignore AP values of AP1 and they treat it as 0. So they're like the sisters in that one chapter that we really like.
Yeah.
And then their other half of it, and then the other half is every unit gets to reroll a single wound roll. So they have the Zarkin half that I like so much.
Right.
And we've seen it on the table how much that can change a game.
Yeah, it makes a difference when you're.
So they've got these two very good halves of chapter tactics.
Yeah.
And that's why, in my opinion, they're like a real win for this army.
Yeah. Well, then you also, obviously you're throwing in, just like other Space Marine armies, you're throwing in doctrines. Their doctrine bonuses are really good. And then, like I mentioned, their durability, like, they're the only character, or the only chapter, maybe even the only army in the game that can get like +2, +3 to toughness. So they can have like a toughness 11 character, which is absurd. That's completely unheard of. But I mean, they can do it. And not saying that you're going to, but like when you got a bike running around that's toughness 7, toughness 8, it's like, well, how the heck do you kill this thing? Especially when it's got like feel no pains and 4 pinball and saves with storm shields. It's crazy. So, and that's just one example. I mean, the whole army, when it's all AP -1, AP -2 equals 0, it's like that's, all those layers added on, just it makes the cake really strong. You know what I mean? So, in terms of what they do everything well. But obviously, we know they like their fire type weapons the best, and their durability is solid as well. So. Great chapter. That's why you see them a lot more 8th and 9th edition. They still do 9th edition really well. You're seeing a little less play of them now, primarily because the meta is kind of shifting more into faster type armies.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean anything, because like we're about to talk about Raven Guard, and you still don't see them very often in the meta.
Well, you're not supposed to see them.
Well, okay, that's actually really funny. But in terms of their gameplay, they're still a popular army, but they're not. You don't see like Raven Guard quite as much, even though they're a fast army. You look at White Scars, and they're just nonstop. People play them. Blood Angels is another army people play, and they're just filled full of jump packs. They're fast.
Yep.
Dark Angels is another one where they're Raven Wing, really fast. They go really quick. They can get to board corners and stuff like that. And then they also have the other half of the coin, which they're super durable. And Salamanders are kind of in a spot where they're like, they have enough mobility to do the job just fine. And good luck getting them off of the center of the battlefield once they get there. You're not going to keep them from getting 15 points in Oaths of Moment, because they will most likely max that out almost every game. Mm-hmm. They're a hard army to peel, that's for sure. So, but that covers them. We're going to jump into Raven Guard, which is
Raven Guard,
our studio chapter.
The Shadow Masters. So they're very much the covert ops of the Space Marines.
Yeah,
they train for a very long time not to be seen, and they got something called the Shadow Step, which trains them to walk between sounds.
Shadow, yeah, they literally can bend light to their will to an extent, and it allows them to be very hard to see. The whole Shadow Step thing, that's Korax's lore. It comes from him, but it still is rubbed off on the army to an extent where you still see characters that are able to do it. But the army just generally as a whole tends to use more stealth guerrilla type tactics.
Yep.
And there's a reason why their nickname is the Sneaky Beakies.
The Sneaky Beakies.
Sneaky Beakies, yeah. They love the beak helmets too. And it fits,
Yes.
it fits the raven thing.
The Raven theme.
Squawk.
Yep.
Squawk,
So theirs is a very unique one. Basically, they can get light cover and dense cover the farther away from the enemy they are.
Yeah, so you get -1 to hit as long as they're touching a terrain feature, and I believe if they're
12 inches.
inches away.
Yep.
And then you get cover out in the open if you are 18 inches away,
Yeah.
which is...
So
It's
they're
all
very
great
good at
stuff.
hiding and remaining hidden.
Yeah.
The problem, it's very good. It makes them very durable. Because if you're at a -1 to hit,
Plus a
and they're
better
getting
save.
plus a better save,
Yep.
it's really hard to kill Space Marines who have a 2-up armor, and you're not even hitting them effectively.
Yeah.
With that being said, it causes you to really be standoffish with the enemy, which isn't quite a Space Marines best. You're not utilizing the Space Marines to the best of their ability.
Yeah, their chapter tactics are weird because the army, especially Raven Guard, they want to be up close. They have so many stratagems and relics and rules and stuff.
They have so
where
many
they
things that get them
love
close.
being close range. They love melee. Their favorite units are the Vanguard veterans. All their jump units with lightning claws. That's just kind of their thing. They do utilize snipers, which is where you can get the benefit off of their Shadow Master's chapter tactic. But as a whole, the Army's chapter tactics doesn't play very well with the way the Army wants to be built.
Exactly.
Because they love to be close, and I think the reason GW built it, I think most people would agree, is that, if they're stuck far away, they still can survive until they get up close, and all of a sudden now you got a real problem on your hands having to deal with these guys who love to be up close. But what's weird is it's like the chapter tactic does something for the army that wants you to do something like stay back, where you don't want to stay back with the army, just because they have so many they have stratagems allow them to pay a CP to move a unit up closer, or fall back with a unit, whatever you want to do with it. But the whole army kind of just generally wants to be in that mid to short range, where unless you build the army specifically around like snipers and heavy weapons, you're most of the time struggling to benefit from the chapter tactic. And we played enough games on the channel now, I think, to know that more often than not, I don't even worry about my chapter tactic. It's great if it's there. If I get it, awesome. We still do measurements on it occasionally, but it's kind of a secondary thing where you don't really worry too much about, which is kind of weird because like Space Marines chapter tactics are built generally for the way the army wants to play. So it's kind of weird that Raven Guard are built in a specific way, and then the chapter tactic tells them to play a different way. So it's a weird kind of rule there. But
I'd almost rather
that
see
said,
them get heavy cover instead of the dense cover.
Yeah.
So that way, in melee, they get a better armor save because they're sneaky.
Well,
They have all these abilities where they want to get up close and just knife you in the back.
Yeah.
But then their chapter tactic really doesn't benefit that.
well, they could strip off a lot of that problem too by just getting rid of the ranges as well. That whole 12 inches and 18 inches away. They can just get rid of that. Look at Grey Knights. They get all that. The Grey Knights get the exact same thing from their Tide of Shadows. Literally the exact same thing, and they don't care about range at all. And Grey Knights are more durable than Raven Guard, so it's like, okay. I say that, but they're also firstborn Marines as opposed to Primaris. So
Yes.
there is that portion of it. But what I mean is that the army as a whole, you could make them utilize their chapter tack, and they would be a very popular chapter if you just got rid of that range thing, because the range just seems like a weird number.
I think they were just trying to be a little cautious because I feel like that'd be pretty strong if they just got cover all the time.
Yeah, I think that's partially why you're seeing it the way it's ruled the way it is. And I think even in 8th edition, it was kind of like, well, they were able to utilize it more often, and it was really strong back then. Well, actually, before Marines got their new Codex in 8th edition, they were actually one of the only played chapters back then. So that's, that could be the same thing that's said for like the Eldari, where they had the -1s to hit it 12 inches away and stuff like that, where they were able to utilize it all game, and it was actually really powerful. But then they kind of reined it in a little bit by saying, well, you can't get more than a -1 to hit. You can't get, so you can't stack stuff like that. So that kind of changed it a little bit. I think because of that, Raven Guard, their chapter tactic isn't quite as powerful as some of the other ones. But with that said, they still make up for it with some of their stratagems being some of the more powerful stratagems in the game. Being able to put a unit or several units or half your army in your opponent's face turn 1 and literally push them to the back of the board is incredibly impressive. And it's a lot of the reason why the Raven Guard have won a lot of their games on the channel. Opponents just have to deal with them, and
they're very good at getting the job done as part of playing the mission.
Yeah, they do, and their mobility is good enough to where they can zip around and claim objectives. They do well for engaging all fronts. They're able to do, they can hold objectives. Scramblers is another thing they can do too. So they benefit from all the mobility type secondaries, but even primaries. Like when their whole army, like half the army is up in the front of the board, your opponent's deployment zone turn 1. The whole back half of the army can just sit back on primaries all game.
Well, yeah, you got those eliminators who can.
And what is your opponent's going to do?
Yeah, sit on back objectives at a -1 to hit with light cover all the time.
Yeah, +2 to their cover saves. So and they're out of 2 up already, so they become like a 0 up cover save.
0 up cover save, -1 to hit. Yeah.
Which is nuts. So it's like, yeah, I mean, they become hard to deal with. The thing is like, with Raven Guard, they're kind of a swingy army where if you don't get first turn, when you do that kind of stuff, well, now all of a sudden your opponent has the opportunity to literally blast everything you have point blank range, and by the end of turn 1, you might not have half of your army. So,
I'd almost rather see them get like light cover if they don't move. That would make more sense because they're hiding.
Yeah.
You see this in other armies, like Necrons can do it, and Tau, that one chapter does it. If they don't move, they get light cover.
Yeah.
It'd make a lot more sense than this 18-inch range stuff.
Well, and and not moving is actually a type of movement in the game today. So, like, there are certain things that allow you to count as not moving. Well, if you count
there's
as not
a
moving,
stratagem where you can count as remain stationary. That'd be very good with them.
yeah. So if you play that in a move of whatever all game long, you can keep moving and still count as getting your cover, for just the cost of a stratagem, 1 CP or whatever it costs. So it's like, well, that all of a sudden makes that chapter tactic real kind of interesting, right? So yeah, I mean that's an option as well. But anyway, Raven Guard in terms of their gameplay, they play really well, but they are one of the chapters that are kind of a risk versus reward. Yeah. If you go first and you play your army aggressively, very rarely will you lose a game with them. With that said, if you go second and you've deployed your entire army aggressively, well, now all of a sudden you have that, you're playing on the back foot, you're probably losing at least a third of your army turn 1. You can still spend CP to like move your units back a little ways and stuff like that, but it becomes a little harder to really play the game after that point. So Raven Guard will start out on the back foot if you don't play them right, or if you don't get the luck of the draw and happen to go first. So with that said, I mean they still do well if they go second, as long as the whole army is not starting up front. So
yeah, they got their own Codex supplement, and they've got a lot of tools to help really overcome their kind of lackluster chapter tactic. Right. So they're definitely a very strong army. They perform very uniquely compared to others.
Yeah, and we've had them on the channel for a while and had quite a few games with them, and I don't think I've ever really been disappointed with them. Of course, I build mine a little different than a lot of other people maybe build Marine armies, but with that said, I teched directly into the Phobos units that Raven Guard want to use. I use a lot of the Hellblasters, and even though they're not like the tip top, they're not eliminators. No. They're still great units, and the way that I play them in the list, they become really effective units in terms of how I play the game. So I think it comes down to the player and how they build their list, just like with any other Marine army. But again, if they get turn 1, they can be incredibly impressive. Yep. Which, it makes them a great army to play. And quite frankly, I'm actually surprised you don't see more Raven Guard armies out there in the current edition.
Yeah.
It's weird because there are, I'm on one of the Facebook groups for Raven Guard, and they are, they're out there. The Raven Guard players there's lots of them.
Yeah, I definitely
out
feel
there,
like
but
they're kind of a rare breed, but they're a very devoted breed.
Yeah.
They're those people who like those really spec up
Yeah.
army types.
Well, I think too, people have to accept that you don't get to always play the newest, greatest Space Marines that come out playing Raven Guard, because the Phobos, Primaris Marines, they do well in Raven Guard, but the Gravis Marines maybe not so well. A lot of the new stuff that came out with Indominus, yeah, they can use them, but they're not, there's other chapters that do better with them. Blade Guard being a good one. Eliminators, probably too, because
They like their Eliminators, yeah.
they're a little shorter, more mid-range armed unit, so they're not going to benefit from the chapter tactic as much, stuff like that. So, there are ways to integrate those units in, but you can't really focus on them. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the Raven Guard players that are like long-term Raven Guard players, they realize that you're not always playing the newest, greatest Space Marines out there, because the old Space Marines do well in the Raven Guard army. So, they actually are the peak performers for that particular chapter. So, but yeah, I think overall in terms of the army play, they're a great chapter.
Yep. And then we have the Death Watch, which
Yeah.
they've got their own book.
They're
Still sitting in 8th edition though, right?
Yeah, so they're
Yep.
they got the whole supplement thing kind of like Raven Guard do in a different sort of way. They were updated to 9th edition, kind of, but I don't think they adapted well to 9th edition.
They're in a weird spot.
Yeah, the thing is, I think because of the fact that there are so many Imperial players out there, Chaos players, you're not seeing as many Xenos players, namely Tau, Eldari, Jakari are pretty popular all of a sudden. But Death Watch are great against Xenos, but everything else, it's kind of like
Who they're designed to fight.
they're more expensive Space Marines that can have some pretty cool, unique units. It integrates units in specific ways that's actually pretty fun. But I think they suffer from the fact that most of the rules, their best rules are focused more on what Xenos do, and it kind of counter how Xenos play.
Yep.
So they don't play super well against Chaos or play super well against other Space Marines, or Imperials in general. So
Yeah, so one of the biggest differences in the way they play is, rather than like Space Marines who have like, here's my unit of Hellblasters, here's my unit of Aggressors, here's my unit of Terminators, Scouts, they have a unit that has like, okay, I have a 1 Terminator, 1 Outrider, one Hellblaster in there in the same unit.
right, yeah,
So rather than having individual units of a specific type, they have one unit that has all types in it.
that's right.
Which can lead to some very interesting gameplay mechanics, because especially in terms of defense.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I got shot by a bolter, Terminator, take it for me.
Yeah.
Oh, I got shot by a las cannon, this guy with the storm shield's going to take it for me.
Yeah. Well, from my experience in 8th edition, playing against Death Watch with Xenos armies was awful for me. I played a game where it was actually an undefeated Tyranid list against a Death Watch list, and the mission wasn't great for me. But with that said, even beyond that, my opponent literally was re-rolling. Like, he was hitting on 2s, wounding on 2s for practically everything,
wounds.
and then re-rolling 1s of everything.
Yeah, just like every one
Army
wounds
wide,
hit, and
he was
you just
hitting
reroll.
and wounding on 2s against my Tyranids, and re-rolling everything he missed. And it was so hard to have anything survive a round of shooting from them. I was losing stuff super fast. So Death Watch were very, very good at killing Xenos, especially in 8th edition. They're still good at it in 9th edition. And I'd be really curious to see a lot of Death Watch players come back and start playing against Drakari. Primarily because of how popular Drakari are now. But I think even like Necrons, they do pretty well against.
They got a stratagem
turning off
specifically
their-
against Necrons.
Well, yeah, being able to turn off their not turn off the reanimation,
off
but
it,
make the
but-
reanimation a lot harder to utilize
Yeah.
is is quite good when used at the right time. So I think it's real interesting that Death Watch aren't sitting in a great spot in terms of like their gameplay currently, but it's primarily because the way people are playing their armies and the meta that's currently being used, which is the lack of Xenos armies. Death Watch still do so good against Xenos. It's like, you know, if you see a huge surge of those come back, especially with Drakari being, you know, back the way they are, as hard as they are, Death Watch actually would be real interesting to see against them big Drakari armies and stuff that are being used right now. So I'd be curious to see that. Maybe we'll have to try that sometime on the channel. Now that we got Drakari here too.
Oh yeah.
So I think we do have two. We have two Death Watch players in our meta. We had three, but I think one of them kind of dropped out. But yeah, we have multiple Death Watch players, so it wouldn't be hard for us to get a game in here with Death Watch. And I think now that we got Drakari, you know, it'll be interesting to see if we can get a game in between those two and see kind of how things hash out. Because right now Drakari still have that huge high win rate, so it would be definitely fun to see. So
I think people are still kind of adjusting to Drakari, figuring them out.
Maybe we'll look into that a little more, because that could be kind of an interesting thing to see in the channel, I think. So, okay, we're moving into Successor Chapter Tactics.
Successor Chapters. So now we got a list of special rules, and to make a Successor Chapter, you basically just pick two, and that's your chapter tactic.
Yeah. There's a few in here that stand out more than other ones, but I think it's nice that there's a big enough list of different ones to where if the meta shifts, people can adjust their Successor Chapter Tactics to be able to, you know, kind of make up that ground. And I wouldn't say any of them are bad, like really bad. There's a lot of them in here that might be kind of like, I don't really want to take that one. But all of them can, for the most part, be kind of used for something. A lot of ones you see the most is like Born Heroes is a pretty popular one. Master Artisans was another one that was really popular for a while. Stealthy was really popular in 8th edition. You know, there's a few of them in here that are actually really good. Whirlwind Rage is another one that's pretty popular for people who like melee. So Duelist is another one that's popular for melee. So it's kind of like, you know, you pick two of your favorite ones or whatever, you know, however you want to play your army, and that's really what it was designed to do. And then you can use those rules, and then you can spend CP to actually, if you want, still be able to take the benefits of the chapter.
Your founding chapter.
Your founding chapter, right. So that way you still unlock the ability to use some of the relics, some of the warlord traits, stuff like that. You just can't. I don't think you can use the name characters. I think that was the only caveat with that. Which is fine, you know, because a lot of people don't even use name characters. So
so there's plenty of in here. None of them really stand out as like something you would really want to build around. A lot of them are just like breakdowns of what we've already seen. So like Stealthy is obviously Raven Guard, and then there's like Stoic, which is the Ultramarines +1 leadership. So you can really mix and match and make this kind of unique combination, but it's nothing really to write home about.
You still see a lot of Successor Chapters out there, and the thing is none of these for the most part are bad per se. No. They're just none of them like really stand out too much more than the other ones, because you can kind of mix and match and they're all fine. You know, none of them are particularly like in 8th edition there was a couple of them that were specifically better than others, especially with the way the metas worked back then. But you know, nowadays I think they're fleshed out enough to where, you know, you could justify taking your founding chapters, or you could justify taking the successor chapters and take those two of whatever you want and still do just fine. And again, Marines are Marines. Marines do well no matter how you run them, for the most part. So I think the successor chapter tactics are still pretty good. You know, you don't get your doctrine bonus or nothing like that, but whatever. So it is, you know, that's not always the greatest thing for you anyway, because not all chapters have great doctrine bonuses anyway. So, yeah.
All right. So that's this is a really great way to make your army very specific, like to your fluff, and if you want to add like a narrative to them, like, oh, they kind of prefer this kind of combat.
Right.
That's very much what I'm doing with my Necrons, and it adds a level of fun to it.
Yeah, and I think White Dwarf came out with a new Marine one too, right? Wasn't it like Emperor's something? Spears of the Emperor, Emperor Spears, something like that. It was like a successor chapter that they came out with. GW just randomly came out with or something. It was more recent, actually. It was like a few months ago. It was just 5 or 6 months ago or something like that. There was a White Dwarf release, and they kind of got their own, like, they got their new characters, and they got a couple of, like, chapter tactics and stuff like that. But it was kind of funny because they were like, they're basically like Blood Angels Light.
Oh,
I think they're called Emperor Spears.
They don't have it in here, but the Blood Ravens, they have a chapter, don't they?
Yeah, Blood Ravens are another one.
I
Blood
can't
Ravens
remember.
have, God, what's his name?
So I briefly had a Blood Ravens army.
Yeah, I think they're the ones that have like the 1s and 2s can never wound them, something like that. Or
I think so.
It's like a smaller version of.
So they have the Stalwart, and then they had
Stalwart.
Warded. Was it Warded, where they ignore mortal wounds?
Yeah, something like that.
I think they had Stalwart and Warded.
Yeah, so they were hard to wound. 1s and 2s never could wound them. So it's kind of like having like a mini version of Transhuman almost.
Yep.
Maybe not as good, obviously, but I think overall, Blood Ravens were another one that was pretty fun to play. I just kind of wish they would have came out with a real, was it Gabriel Angelos?
Yeah, Gabriel Angelos.
I wish they would have came out with like a new version of his model, beefed up, fully Primarist. He's already a big dude as it is, probably one of the biggest Space Marines out there actually, but in a Primaris version would have just been phenomenal.
Yes.
He would have just towered over. He'd have been like almost Gilliman size, and
So
that hammer is terrifying. And I mean, he's iconic because he's like, what was it, all the Dawn of War games or whatever had him in it?
Yep.
So
that's exactly what it was. Is the Dawn of War games? They it was a Relic, I believe, made those games, and they collaborated with GW. And GW was like, we want you to make a RTS for Warhammer.
Right.
And they're like, okay, on one condition, we get to make our own Space Marines chapter. And they
Right.
came up with the Blood Ravens.
Yeah.
So they are officially canon, and they started giving them their own rules more recently, and they've been appearing in everything.
Yeah. Yeah, you see them occasionally. They're not like a super
No,
common
they're not
chapter,
a super big one.
but hardcore Space Marines players, most of them know about Blood Ravens, and they have a unique niche that people have kind of latched onto, especially with memes and stuff about them stealing everybody else's relics, which is obviously hilarious. But
they have a very unique backstory because they don't
acquirers.
know who their founding chapter is.
Yeah. They're acquirers.
They're very inquisitive, almost dangerously so.
Yeah.
And they kind of steal relics. They're like, oh no, these were ours before. We don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They're from our founding chapter. But you don't know who your founding chapter is.
That's a Dark Angel's relic. What are you talking about? That was Vulcan's relic. Why do you have Vulcan's relic and Lion's relics? They were from our founding chapter. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, Blood Ravens are kind of a funny one.
So they're very cool.
They got that Raven Guard feel to them, but they're sneaky in a different kind of way. They're sneaky in the fact that they just take whatever they want.
Yeah, they're sneaky. They don't really exhibit the like covert ops aspect that the Raven Guard do.
Yeah.
They have an abnormally large amount of psychers in their forces.
Yes, they do.
Which is suspicious to some people.
They have a tendency to kill everything they come into contact with too. So they're kind of a funny one. It's weird because they kind of remind me a little bit of Minotaurs, which is the Forge World chapter, and those guys specifically hunt Space Marine chapters. So it's kind of funny where you look at like the lore for Blood Ravens. It's like, wow, these guys are. They're a real interesting chapter.
Yeah, they're very unique.
I love that they've kind of become almost a comical chapter, even though they are a serious chapter.
They are a serious chapter, and that's why I love is like they had this custom chapter from someone outside of GW that they made, and they made it. They indoctrinated it.
Well, what's more is like
made it unique and cool.
Even though they are kind of a comical chapter, they have one of the greatest heroes, Gabriel Angelos.
Yep.
Imperium wide, I think pretty much everybody looks up to him. He's an awesome character. His lore is phenomenal. He's terrifying.
Well, he became the chapter after what was it? I think his name was Kairos.
Yeah.
Ended up ascending to Demon Hope, and they killed him.
Right. Yeah.
Because he went full on traitor.
Right. Yeah. So Yeah, I mean,
So they have a very cool
they're
backstory.
but there, there's more other, there's so many other successor chapters out there, especially with GW acquiring all the new stuff like the Astartes. The guy who did Astartes, I forget his name, but they acquired all the rights for basically everything that people are making on the side, all these side projects.
Yeah.
So now GW has all these other successor chapters they're adding into, in addition to like, Space Sharks, Carcharodons, Minotaurs. There's so many other ones out there that are all pretty cool. So,
And they leave the door so open for you to
do.
make your own chapters too.
They do, and I mean, there's 20 Primarchs. Two of them are unheard of. Nobody knows for sure who or what they were, or what chapters they were, or whatever. We know that Ultramarines ended up like absorbing some of their chapters, but beyond that, it's like, well, who are these guys? So
nobody
GW
knows.
left the door open for you to be
Yep.
able to kind of pick and choose what you want. Not to mention when the legions broke down into different chapters, it's like, well, now they got breakaway chapters that are completely different from the normal chapters. So there's just so much variety out there.
And the universe is so big that successor chapters are constantly made and destroyed like within the same day.
Yeah.
Like there's 500 new Space Marines. Oh, they got hit by an asteroid. Well, I guess that's that chapter.
They have some real good lore.
There's some real good lore.
They had a good run. It's over now. Moving right along.
Moving right along. Make a new chapter.
The Grey Knights wipe out another chapter one day, and we're like, what are you talking about? The Grey Knights don't even exist. Neither did that chapter. So yeah, it's great how Marines have been set up to where they can be anything at any time at any place, and fit in with the lore just fine.
Yep.
So I think it's pretty cool. Successors are neat, and good for you guys if you guys love converting and making your own chapters. I'm all about that. That's one of my favorite things about the hobby.
One of my favorite too.
But in terms of like the founding chapters and stuff like that, there's so much built backstory behind them, that makes them fun to play, great too. So, more power to you whichever way you go. It's just the way I look at it is don't take the successor chapter just because you want cool rules. Don't take a founding chapter just because you want those specific rules, because they're better in game, whatever. You should take stuff based off of how you enjoyed playing the game, and build your army accordingly. That's the greatest thing about Space Marines. There's so much vast options out there for you to choose from. So make it your own. Make it your army. All right, moving into what do we got? Chapter command.
Chapter command. So basically, you can take your tech marine, your apothecary, you got your tech marine, your chaplain, and your captains, and you can make them even better.
Yeah, it's captains, chaplains, tech marines, librarians, apothecaries, ancients, and company champions.
Okay. Yep.
All of them can be updated to something new, which is basically an updated version or a stronger version of what the original was. You can only take one of each in your army. So if you take one captain, you can only take one as a chapter master. You can't take another detachment, take another captain, and then take another chapter master. It doesn't work that way. You get one, that's it. If you take a named chapter master, you only get the named chapter master. You don't get to take an upgraded one. So that's kind of how that works. You pay a premium. If you're playing power levels, there's a couple power costs for that. If you're playing points, there's a premium on points that you pay for. In the past, it used to be CP, where you'd spend CP instead. Now, in order to save you CP, GW was nice enough to be like, hey, we'll just let you pay a few extra points. You get the model you want. And they perform really well. So all of the upgraded versions are really good, really good. GW just hammered it out of the park when it came to being able to build your characters in your own. The chapter master, the master of sanctity, the master of the forge, chief librarian, chief apothecary, chief chapter ancient, chapter champion. All of them can be uniquely built and specific to how you want to build your army, and they are all phenomenal no matter what you take in terms of what's available to them. So it's really good stuff. And some specifically more shine than others. The ancient and the apothecary probably being the two biggest ones, because they are elite slot units that are actually somewhat stronger than some of the HQs.
Sometimes.
in terms of what they do for the army.
Yep.
Not so much physically, but
So with all these, you pay your little premium, which is usually points or power level,
Yeah.
and it makes them that much better because it gives them a couple abilities and gives them access to warlord traits, relics, and warlord traits and relics.
well, they also get like an additional ability on top of it too. Like
Yep.
for instance, the apothecary. Chief apothecary gains the following ability. It just it can use its combat restorative ability twice in a turn instead of just once, which is great.
Yeah, really good.
Then it's got stuff like the selfless healer warlord trait where they heal 3 flat instead of D3, and then it costs 0 for bringing a model back, which is absurdly strong.
Yep. So cheap apothecary is
When
a
you
real
take
popular one.
when you take into consideration just the standard apothecary gives a 6 up, feel no pain. These things all combined into one just makes the apothecary like ridiculous, which is why you see the apothecary in Space Marine armies more than any other character, because they are the best for what they do for the army. It's ridiculous how strong these things are.
Another popular one is Chapter Master because he gives an aura
Yep.
of core units get just reroll hits.
You pick a unit, and that unit gets to reroll all hits, and then as a ability,
select one unit at 6.
you get an aura where everything within 6 inches that's core gets to reroll hit rolls of 1. Now this is the captain ability, plus you get the chapter master ability, which is the pick a unit, they get all rerolls, rerolls all hits. Sorry, and if you're not running a chapter master that's named, 9 times out of 10 you're going to see a Space Marine player pay that extra point cost to take the chapter master from their captain to give them that extra boost, because it's worth it and it is really good in game. All of these really, there's none of them that are bad. There's just ones you see more than others.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Chief Librarian's Psychic Mastery. So it's a warlord trait and just +1 to all of his psychic tests. +1 doesn't seem like much, but when you're applying it to psychic tests, it makes them so much more reliable.
Well, I mean, you look at Grey Knights, and Grey Knights, when they're casting, 20 powers in a turn, and everything's on +1, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal, especially when you start stacking on smites, multiple psychers. The Chief Librarian getting this warlord trait's great. I think it's a solid one. The relic I think is okay for it. I think really the way this guy's built is the fact that you get 1 additional power from the Chief Librarian, and that's the main portion of it that you really want. Getting an extra power is always a good thing. Getting an extra deny is always a good thing. So you get 1 of each of those. Being able to choose different powers is always a really good thing for your army. It lets you choose from an arsenal of different things that allows you to adjust as you need to on the fly, rather than being stuck with just a smite and just with a couple of powers that may not benefit you all game long. Now you get more stuff to benefit you throughout the whole game, rather than 1 power or whatever that specific to whatever you want to do for that turn. So options are great, and I think Chief Librarians are solid because of that. The Neural Shroud Relic, I think it's kind of funny because it's a psychic hood with a 24-inch range.
Yes.
So basically, it's the -1 to psychic tests. That can be really fun, especially if you put this thing in addition to the Q-Lexus, the Q-Lexus Assassin, where now all of a sudden they're getting like -2 or -3 in their psychic tests, which is outright ridiculous. But the problem is that even then the range
you might not be running against psychers.
It's a struggle. So unless you pay like the CP during before the game starts, spend that stratagem to take extra relics, you're generally not going to run that one. But it's fun, if you got a lot of psychers you're going against, it could be worthwhile considering it. So Chief Librarian's a good one. Chief Apothecary is obviously a winner. Chapter Master you're going to see more often than not. Master of Sanctity is pretty good, but he's not the most popular one.
No.
The reason you see the Master of Sanctity is because of the fact that the Chaplain on Bike is really strong. The Master of Sanctity works really well with him. being able to, I think, what does it give you, +1 on your rolls, or 3 rolls to roll, or something like that?
+1 to your litany rolls?
Yeah, I think you know one
No, that's a
additional,
warlord trait.
you know one additional litany for just the
Yeah.
ability, but then the warlord trait gives you the extra
+1 to
+1, and then
Yeah.
the stratagem is, I think, probably the best portion of it.
the commanding.
Commanding oratory only costs
Yep.
1, which normally costs, I think, 2 or 3 or something like that. Which allows you to drop a chaplain in and then use his trait after they deep strike. Which, like for instance, Black Templar, that's the only way they can play their chaplains, because
Yeah.
unless you're running all bike chaplains, you can't get up the board fast enough to do it. So, it's a good ability. It's a good upgrade for them. I like it. You just don't see them as much because chaplains aren't as popular as some of these other ones. The Tech Marine, the what are they called? The Master of the Forge. They're fine. They heal really well.
Yeah.
Vehicles, they do some cool buffs, but you don't see them that often. I think primarily because infantry tend to be more common for Marine armies nowadays.
You'd see those more than like an Iron Hands army.
Yeah.
I really don't see like Tech Marines at all
Yeah.
outside of like Iron Hands.
They've kind of fell off a cliff primarily because of the fact that most Marine armies tend to spam infantry more than anything nowadays. But, they can be fun in certain armies. My problem mostly with them is the fact that you can't take them on bikes. When you were able to take Tech Marines on bikes, they could keep up with vehicles like land speeders and stuff like that and fly around real fast, and then heal them back up and give some buffs and stuff. So back then they were really great. Now they're kind of slow, and they, most vehicles they can't really keep up with unless they're advancing, and there's some problems with it. So, I mean, they're all right, but they're not the one you see the most for sure. So, Chapter Ancients, they're fun. I think they're a good upgrade. You get one ability that allows you to, I think it upgrades your standard or something like that. The ability gives you like +1 to melee hits or something like that.
Is it melee? Yeah, it's only melee.
Pick a
hits.
unit within 6 inches.
I remember
and
now.
they
That's
get
why I didn't like
+1.
it.
Plus 1 to their
if it was
ability.
+1 to all hits, it'd be amazing.
It would be incredibly powerful. But this is in addition to the actual banner they get, which, so, when a model dies in a 4-up, they still get to fire, which is fine. And then they get this ability in addition to that, which means you don't necessarily need to take the Chapter Ancient, because it's kind of just like the ability by itself isn't super great. But when you compare it with because you get the Warlord trait and the Relic and all that kind of stuff is actually pretty good.
Relic will give them 2 attacks instead of 1.
Right.
And then they get +1 to hit.
Yeah. Now, if I recall correctly,
There's a little bit of a combo there.
according to 6 inches, objectives. Oh yeah, here's the other one. Steadfast Example. This is my favorite part about the Chapter Ancient, and I've actually started taking this because I always run a Chapter Ancient over Rites of War. Rites of War is really good, and it's available for everybody. But the Chapter Ancient be able to take this Steadfast Example. Now, all of a sudden, your stuff that is objective secured all of a sudden counts as double objective secured. And then anything that's not objective secured all of a sudden counts as objective secured. Is very similar to the way Rites of War works, but in some cases, it's actually better. I love running my stuff with my Chapter Ancient. Cade has a tendency to turn off my auras on my Ancient, but I digress. With that said, it's other than that, it's a threat that he has to deal with. It's a threat that opponents have to worry about all game long. Even though the Apothecary is still technically the stronger character in terms of what it does for the army, it also balances it out. So now my Ancient becomes a real problem in addition to my Apothecary as well. So I think the Warlord trait makes the Chapter Ancient alone worth taking. But the abilities that they get are fine too. They're, the thing is you're only paying, what, I think, was it 20, 30 points for that?
Something like that.
25, I think, right? Ancient, no, it's 20 points for the Ancient. So 20 point premium for getting an extra reroll, or getting an extra to hit on melee for a unit. And frankly, in an army like my Raven Guard, where I run like Hellblasters and stuff, so I'm not necessarily good in combat, but all of a sudden now I'm getting +1 to hit for my 10 Hellblasters. That can make a difference between winning and losing the combat. So, it adds up, and anywhere it can help is great for me. So I don't mind paying the points, frankly.
Yeah, so all these, generally, their benefits are coming out of what they can do to buff the rest of your army.
Right.
Except for the Chapter Champion. He's basically just revolved around making himself so much more fighting.
He goes from being a company champion that's great, if you give them the right relics, the right warlord traits, so on and so forth, to all of a sudden becoming a real scary threat.
Yeah.
And if you don't have access to the Emperor's Champion, this guy, actually in a lot of cases, is better than the Emperor's Champion.
Yeah.
The Emperor's Champion's kind of just, you get what you get for your points. This allows you to take some stuff that really makes him a real nightmare in combat.
Yep.
Especially against characters. He just shreds characters apart.
He basically gives himself a bunch of rerolls and skillful parry. Like, he's harder to hit. It just turns him to a really good duelist and very combat-y guy, which I don't know is necessarily needed all that much because your guys are usually pretty fighty as is. Do you need them to be that step above when you can just save your points and maybe just take something a little more? Or take like a chapter agent, which will help all your other guys fight better rather than just this one guy.
Yeah. The chapter champion I think is fine as it is. If you really want some melee characters to be a complete nightmare in combat, the chapter champion's a good way to go, and you can do some insane stuff to make them really strong. With that said, they're one of the least popular and probably the least used of these buffed up units. Because of the fact that it's one model that only buffs itself, and even though it is a nightmare in combat, you're kind of you're relying on paying these extra points just to be able to assume that he's going to be able to do his job. Mm-hmm. One model generally isn't going to be able to do their job as well as 5 models all doing the same job. So, usually buffing units tends to be better for these kind of upgrades, rather than sticking all your eggs into one basket and making this one model be able to do a bunch of cool stuff that he may not be able to do throughout the game. So, I think in a lot of cases the chapter champion, while you can make it better than the Emperor's Champion, kind of, you run into the issue of where it's probably not worth spending the stratagems or the CP, probably not worth, taking up warlord traits, relics, stuff like that, because you can take other things that do similar stuff and not have to pay all these premiums to get it. So, sure, great, they're cool if you really want to run them, but you don't, if you want to play for efficiency in the game, this isn't the way to go. So, they are cool though. Don't get me wrong, they are great. So, if you don't have access to the Emperor's Champion and you want to play an Emperor's Champion in your other chapters, there's the way to go. So, it's kind of the deal.
Really cool.
All right, so moving on.
Stratagems.
Oh, the fun begins.
So, they surprisingly don't have a huge amount of stratagems, despite how big, the Space Marine book
the
is.
stratagems for the core book, for their basic, the basic codex has been very narrowed down into what they specifically do. A lot of them have been taken away or turned into other rules.
Yep.
For instance, only in death does duty end, duty eternal is what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
of.
Duty Eternal.
Duty Eternal was a stratagem which half damage on dreadnoughts. It was changed to its being no longer a stratagem, and all of a sudden it just reduces. It comes free on dreadnoughts, and it just reduces their damage by 1. And it's just a dreadnought-wide thing. Everybody gets it. So they've taken away some of the stratagems, especially some of the ones that aren't utilized quite as effectively, and narrowed them down to the ones that can be used and the ones that that do what they should do for the army, while still giving, you still have access to stuff like the supplements and whatnot that give you access to a whole other set of stratagems, which can still be utilized to play the army the way you want to play it. So, Raven Guard, I use both these books together, so it gives me almost, it's not twice as many, but it's more like a third more stratagems than what's normally available in here. So, it's nice to have all those together, but initially when you look at this and you only get the core Space Marine stuff, it's limited on what you get access to, which is understandable, especially with the supplements being out. So,
but kind of generally, there's nothing, at least that I immediately saw, that does something very wild or out there. A lot of it's just kind of stuff you need, I can allow a unit to fight again, or shoot again, or fall back and still shoot. Just a lot of situational things.
I think so. GW has taken a lot of these stratagems that were available to every unit in the army and has like narrowed them down into making it so that they're only utilized or only able to be utilized on specific units. Like the fight twice, it only costs
That's
2 CP now, I think.
2 CP, yep.
As opposed to 3, which it was before, but it can
Yep.
only be used by assault intercessors.
Yep.
So therein lies the issue. It used, if you could use it on Vanguard veterans, or if you could use it on like Blood Angels characters, Blood Angels, Death Company, stuff like that, it was insanely strong, which is why it costs so much, 3 CP or whatever.
Yep.
But now it costs less. It's a little more focused onto what units they really want people to be able to fight twice with. Another one is Transhuman Physiology, where it can only be used on Primaris units.
That's a
it
real
costs
popular
one.
one.
It costs 1 CP if it's 5 models or less. Anything over that costs 2 CP. In the past, Transhuman was open for everybody. Any infantry in the army could take it and utilize it, and it was too strong for certain units. Terminators, especially, being able to use Transhuman was just unreal. So now all of a sudden, it kind of reined those rules back in. The stratagems make it so they're still affordable and still great, but now they're not overwhelmingly strong in some portions of the game. So you're seeing a lot of them more focus on like characters and maybe Primaris, or some of them are even only the old Marines, the firstborns, stuff like that. So it's kind of like GW is pushing people to use their stratagems with certain units, which I like, because it makes them more flavorful, frankly. The more popular ones you're going to see, obviously, Transhuman Physiology. I think that's probably the most common one. Only in
Right.
Death, Zudian's pretty popular because when a character dies, at least you get to fight with it. I think you see the Relics of the Chapter is always used. Hero of the Chapter is always used.
Gives you more warlord traits, more relics. That's why you see people dropping like 5 CP before the game starts.
In my case, 6 or 7. 6 or 7, depending on what I'm doing. Yeah. But there's some good ones in here. Auspex Scan's always a good one.
Yes.
Skilled Riders is pretty good for speeders, bikes, and stuff like that. You don't see a ton of them used, frankly, but you do see like specific ones, especially with the way the meta is built currently, utilized over and over and over again, and you can kind of see why they're being used over and over again. But when you go back and look, as the meta shifts, some of these other stratagems are going to start being used more often than others. So it kind of shifts people out of just sticking to one particular stratagem. I mean, I don't even have to look at this book anymore to know what stratagems I'm going to use in a game. But it's always nice to have these options open. If I go through and I get stuck in a situation where I can't get out of, well, maybe I have a stratagem that allows me to do that. So.
Yep, and one thing I like to say is whenever you're building an army, you definitely want to keep in mind what stratagems you're going to be using, and use that as a guide to what your army is going to be doing and how it's going to play.
Right.
And Space Marines do this very well. I mean, you got smoke screen, flak missile, hellfire rounds, grav pulse, tremor shells, shock and awe, assault launchers, melt a bomb. Basically, like, what weapon do I want to be using?
Yeah. And
you're going to be using that like every phase you can. You can almost build this tactic for your entire army.
Yeah. Well, that's
around stratagems.
The Marines are regimented as it is. The doctrines are kind of the prime example of that, where every turn they do something specific or something different. Each unit does something specific or something different in order to make the army as effective as it possibly can be. So the stratagems are no different. They and they haven't changed since they came out in 8th edition, but in terms of like the way you want to utilize them. But I think they've just been kind of reined in a little bit, more honed, and some of the prices, in terms of cost, has been reduced on some of them, which made them so they went from being unused to all of a sudden being more utilized, or vice versa, where they were insanely powerful before, and now all of a sudden, rather than being 1 CP and doing something insane, well, now they're 2 or 3 CP and they're more balanced. So GW's done a real good job of making stratagems pretty fair. And then the fact that you still have the supplements from 8th edition that are still available in order to utilize your specific army, your chapter stratagems,
Yep.
is pretty huge because it allows you to do stuff with your army according to how you want to play the list. So it's pretty great. The basic codex covers kind of all your basic needs, whereas a supplement covers all the stuff that your army wants to do. So I think it's pretty cool that you have the integration between both. So, and like we've said, a million times already, Space Marines just have so much variety that all the stuff they get access to is great for them. They can utilize all this stuff properly. So it just comes down to knowing your book well and getting used to using these stratagems when you need them. So.
But yeah, what I wanted to say is that's the one I never see people use, and I think it's really good. The Unyielding in the Face of the Foe.
Sure.
So you just need Mark 10 Gravis Armor, and for 1 CP against damage characteristics of 1, you get to add +1 to your armor saves against that attack.
Yeah.
So you can very easily turn like your aggressors that are in terrain into like a 0+ armor.
Yeah.
And like, how good is that? It is really good.
I think it's good because most Gravis armor, I think Gravis armor across the board is all toughness 5, right?
Yep.
So not only are they kind of already somewhat difficult to kill, but all of a sudden you get better saves. Plus it adds to your cover save as well.
Yep.
Because it's made by armor saving throw, it's not adds to your actual armor save. So you still benefit from the cover saves and all the other stuff that you get in addition.
Yep. So like if you're getting hit with AP2 and you're sitting in cover and you use this, you still get your 3-up armor.
Yeah. I think the reason you don't see this all that often, is because of the fact that Gravis is so limited. There's not so much of it out there. It's become more popular now, primarily.
Especially with the heavy intercessors.
Indominus, heavy intercessors are a little more popular.
Which I think are ridiculous.
Inceptors are another one you want to take a look at because I think they are Gravis as well, if I'm correct.
Inceptors, yep.
And then there's a couple of other ones that are Gravis armor as well. That's quite popular. Aggressors, obviously. But anything that's Gravis armor related, they're going to be utilizing, should be utilizing that if they remember to do so, obviously. But it's kind of one of those niche things where it's like, okay,
yeah,
I forgot I had Gravis armor on the battlefield. I forgot to use a stratagem.
They're definitely, with the addition of the heavy intercessors, you can definitely fill an entire force of purely Gravis armor.
Right.
Now, I agree with you that it's select units that have it.
Yeah.
So not everyone can use this, but
That's right.
the Gravis units that can utilize it should be doing so all the time. It's only 1 CP.
Well,
and it can definitely save models from dying.
Yeah, and they're already pretty durable. So now making them even more durable makes those units stick around a lot longer. Eliminators are a great example of that because Eliminators are Gravis, and they have the ability to stick around. Are they not?
No,
I could have sworn they were.
the Eliminators with the camo cloaks.
I'm thinking Eradicators. There we go. That's the one I'm thinking. Not my Phobos stuff. The Eradicators, I'm pretty sure. They're the new Indominus. They're the new Indominus ones.
Eradicators.
Yeah,
The
Meltagun guys.
Oh, yeah. Yep, I know who you're talking about now. The ones that shoot twice and everyone uses them because they're insane.
Well, they were insane. They're not as used as much as they were. They're becoming a lot less utilized than they had in the past. God, where the hell are they? Blade Guard, Primaris.
Heavy?
Well, when you got 100 data sheets to go through.
Yes, there's almost literally 100 data sheets. I think it's like 98. And this is just the core book.
They're elite, right?
I want to say they're heavy, aren't they?
I could have sworn they were elite. Maybe
Eliminators?
I don't even know anymore.
We'll find them here.
I don't know.
But yeah, if they're the ones I'm thinking he's talking about, they're taking units of like 3.
They're heavy.
And they have their twin melta, or no, they have a special type of melta where it gets to fire twice.
Yeah.
If they shoot at the same type, the same target. And they were really good.
Yeah. No, that's Eliminators. Eradicators. There we go. Okay. Yeah.
Eradicators.
Yeah. MX Gravis. So yeah, they are.
Yep.
They're toughness.
So they have Gravis armor. They're toughness
5. 3 wounds a pop with a 3-up save, 2 open cover.
Yep.
And now all of a sudden you give them a 1-up essentially.
Yep.
Yeah, they're pretty solid. Anything with AP is just gonna like plink off them unless you're using like las cannons and high AP stuff on them.
Yep.
So
well, I mean, even against a las cannon, you'd still get what 5-up.
Right. Yeah, and that's my point. Like you could sink a ton of stuff into them that's like super good AP, and still do practically nothing to them. Yeah. Other Eliminators all of a sudden become bad at killing Eliminators, which is absurd. So, yeah, I think it's an
No, you're
interesting
good.
stratagem, but you just don't see Gravis that often.
With the stratagem and in cover, you get a 4-up save against the last cannon.
Yeah.
That's a 50% chance to shrug off a last cannon.
Yep.
For 1 CP. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
If that saves a guy from dying, it's totally worth it.
Well, and even if it goes through, there's still only what a
30,
55% chance I'll kill him.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the last cannon might not even do enough damage.
It might
to
not
kill him.
do enough damage, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, frankly, you could end up whiffing and still not lose your guy. You know.
Yep.
Not to mention if you got an apothecary around, the guy's now
Just
got
come
feel no
back.
pains, and then when he does die, you bring
Yep.
him back. It's like
Yep.
there's a reason why eliminators were as popular as they were.
But, yeah, any of the others that really stick out in your eyes?
I mean, the thing is, I utilize most of them at least sometimes. There's a few of them I don't utilize all that often because I don't run a whole lot of vehicles in my Marine armies. My Black Templar might utilize some of them, like Power of the Machine Spirit, some of the other ones. The Combat Revival I use, my Apothecary. The ones I use the least is going to be the vehicle ones because I just don't run that many vehicles. I don't hardly ever run Dreadnoughts. I do have a few of them, but they're one of those things where it's like Dreadnoughts are great, but the whole army as a whole I can get more bodies in and take more units I enjoy taking, where I just generally don't run the Dreadnoughts.
So, yeah, Dreadnoughts do have access to the Wisdom of the Ancients, which gives them, like, an aura of reroll 1s for core around them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of neat.
Well, that's just
But-
one of, and all the vehicle stratagems are available on them as well. So it's like, you know, they can auto. I don't think they get to auto explode, but they get like Armor of Contempt and pretty much anything vehicle related. They're going to be able to have access to. So
Yeah, I love that they've really kind of given more abilities to Dreadnoughts to see them kind of fight more like Space Marines on the tabletop. Because for a while there, you never saw them.
Well-
Because they had like 8 wounds and toughness 7. They would just like die, do like 2 las cannons.
Yeah.
And it'd be like,
but you don't see the original Dreadnoughts anymore. Now you see, you know, maybe the Venerable Dreadnoughts. You see.
well, I'm not a huge fan of the Ironclad.
The Ironclad is another one I was going to mention. You see that a lot. You see the Leviathans are pretty popular. The Contemptors are somewhat popular. It's the bigger, bulkier ones that have like invulns and stuff like that you see most often. But with that said, I mean, Dreadnoughts are Dreadnoughts, and the fact is that they are vehicles, but they're still vehicles with Marines inside. It's not like a normal vehicle with like a a Rhino chassis or a Land Raider where it's somebody driving it around or whatever. I mean, it's basically a Dreadnought is a dead guy inside of a big box that's fighting like a Space Marine, you know. So, you know, because it's a walker style, having all these stratagems, kind of like Space Marines have all these stratagems available to them, is pretty interesting. It makes Dreadnoughts kind of fun to play, which they've always been fun to play, but it's more so than it was before. So, yeah, I definitely like it. In terms of the other stratagems in the army, I mean, all of them are useful for certain things. There's a lot of them I probably wouldn't use very often. Orbital Bombardment's probably one that I probably wouldn't use too much.
Yeah.
I don't know, Uncompromising Fire, all these, like the Tremor Shell, Shock and Awe, Assault Launcher, stuff like that I don't use very much. But it doesn't mean,
They're very specific to certain units.
yeah, and it doesn't mean I won't use them. It's just that I won't use them as much because they don't come up as often in the game.
Yeah, how often do you bring a Thunderfire cannon?
Yeah. Well, even Melta Bombs, like I run Vanguard Vets, and how often do I get to use it? Very rarely. So, it's great. It's great to have that stuff available, but if you never use it, no big deal. Whatever. They're just extra stratagems that are there. So.
Yep.
Okay.
Make those specific weapons even better.
Yeah.
Warlord traits. Whew, we got quite a few for
They have a lot. They have a
Space
lot.
Marines.
Yeah. Yeah, they have access to a ton of Warlord traits, all of which are, for the most part, very good. Rights of War being one of the more popular ones. That's because they get objectives secured in the area. As an aura, Space Marines with objectives secured when they're not normally objective secured is awesome. Now all of a sudden their elites, their fast attack, and their heavy support infantry all of a sudden become OBSEC. Their characters become ODSEC. It's great stuff. It's really great. One of the better chapter tactics in here. Storm of Fire is pretty cool, but you don't see it that much because it's an aura, 6-inch range, and then on 6s, you get an extra AP essentially. They have doctrines to kind of cover for that, so you don't see it all that often. But it can be kind of fun if you want to like stack like AP -3, 4, 5 on stuff. When your regular bolters are AP -3, it's kind of like, wow, that's crazy good. So it's all right. It's just one of those things you don't see very often. Champion of Humanity, that can be good, but it's designed for character killing. So Champion of Humanity isn't very popular because of the fact that unless you're running that company champion, you're running something that wants to hunt down and kill characters. Champion of Humanity doesn't get used all that often. But with that said, it's still fine. It's a good warlord trait. It's kind of fun. Iron Resolve gives +1 to wound for your warlord. So if your warlord's got 6 wounds or 5 wounds, and all of a sudden it's got 7 or 6, whatever it had before, +1. And then in addition to that, anytime they lose a wound, they get a 6 up feeling pain.
Yep.
So it's good, especially if you've got a character that you don't want to die. It's not super popular, but and that's primarily because of the fact that the character rule is always being utilized.
Yep.
The character is generally not in harm's way anyway.
So I'm a big fan of those ones that make your stuff like even harder to kill, especially your characters. But in terms of actual gameplay, stuff like this usually doesn't get utilized as much to make it worth it. Because, like we said, the lookout sir is usually doing the job anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it can be used, and it's not that it's bad. It's just, you don't see it all that often. Imperium Sword, I think, is a good one. If you want a killy character that can run around and chop things up, and not limited to only killing characters, if you want to just run around and dice things up, Imperium Sword is a solid one.
Give it to your chapter champion.
I almost always give it to one of my lieutenants, or I think, my lieutenants run it probably more often than anything else in my Raven Guard, because it's just fun to run around and watch their lightning claws shred things to pieces, especially with that +1 strength, and then +1 attacks. It just needs to make a charge, and they love making charges, so it's all good. So Imperium Sword's a pretty solid one. It's just, you want to put it on one character and only be able to utilize it on that character. It doesn't really buff the rest of the army, so Rites of War generally still is the better, more popular one. Fear Made Manifest is the last one of the Space Marine basic traits. That gives you, while enemies within 6 inches, you get that unit gets -1 to leadership, which we were talking about some minus leadership stuff before.
A couple.
That's all pretty good. It's generally when you can stack them that they become really good.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with it. And then each time a combat attrition test is taken for a unit, you subtract 1 from the combat attrition test. So it can make, forcing your opponent to fail saves, fail leadership, stuff like that, all of a sudden become like, wow, I really got to be careful what I'm doing around this character, because the character actually can make it a problem for you. With that said, it's not super popular because generally you don't want to put your character in harm's way in order to be able to utilize this. So if you're playing a melee type character and you can confidently feel like you can potentially reduce enough of their models to make them force that leadership test, all of a sudden it can become kind of a good warlord trait, but generally there's better ones out there. So not awful, but not great either. Moving into the Vanguard warlord traits, shoot and fade. That's always a fun one. In your shooting phase, after you shoot with a friendly Phobos unit within 6 inches of the warlord, that unit can make a normal move or it can advance. In either case, if it does, that unit is not eligible to declare a charge. That's going to be utilized more for stuff like long range type weapons. Like what would be really fun to use it on would be like a Stalker Bolt Rifle Intercessor Squad, where they can pop out during their movement phase, use their Stalker Bolt Rifles to fire downfield, and then all of a sudden jump back to an objective behind cover or obscured terrain or whatever. So
very Raven Guard.
It makes it very cool to kind of like be able to pop out and be like, hey, bam, 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 kill a bunch of models, and all of a sudden now they're protected and unkillable or untargetable. So that's a pretty good one. You don't see it a whole lot, primarily just because Phobos units aren't super popular unless you're playing Raven Guard. But it's there, and it's pretty good. It's pretty good. And keep in mind, too, I think your character, your warlord, has to be Phobos.
Yeah, your character has to have Phobos armor. So I believe there's, a librarian, and...
So there's quite a few. There's a captain, a lieutenant, and a librarian that all
lieutenant,
have it.
and... is there a captain that has Phobos armor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The captain that has the sniper rifle, it's actually... Where's he at? He's the one over there.
Yep. Okay.
So he's the one that came in the Shadow Spear box. So yeah,
Very cool.
they have access to Phobos, which is great. And frankly, lieutenants and captains, they buff the rest of the army, which is what they're designed to do anyway. So it's kind of funny where you can like put your character out in the open, out when they're not obscured, but like within range of that Hellblaster unit or what, intercessor unit with stalker rifles. Have them sit in that spot, 3 inches, right at that 3 inch mark, out in the open so they can still fire their weapon. Have that unit pop out, shoot their stuff, and then pop back, but still in range of the character, so the character's untargetable. It's like, that's kind of mean, but it's great.
Right.
So it's a fun one, but you don't see it utilized all that often because that kind of gameplay generally is dead for 9th edition. It's great, I guess, if you got the extra Warlord trait available, but other than that. All right, Lord of Deceit. Both players deploy their armies. You can select up to 3 Phobos units and then put them into strategic reserves or redeploy them. This is always a good one. Being able to redeploy any of your army after you've set up kind of can confuse the opponent or kind of screw with their game plan a little bit. It is Phobos locked only, so again, you have to keep in mind, this is going to be utilized mostly in a Raven Guard army, other armies that maybe want to play Phobos units. But it's pretty good because when you can redeploy units and kind of, if you don't like the way that they're sitting or maybe they're out in the open and you kind of want them covered, you can all of a sudden be like, oh, just kidding. So it's pretty solid.
You can apply pressure where you need it.
Yeah. So it's these kind of rules are always great for the player because it allows the player to kind of control what happens to their army. So I think it's a good Warlord trait. It's always competing with other Warlord traits, so it becomes an issue whether or not you can afford to use this one. So Master of the Vanguard's another one. This is another Phobos one that's friendly Phobos unit within 6 inches of the Warlord. You get +1 to charge rolls. And each time the unit select to make a normal move, advance, or fall back, you can add 1 to the move characteristic until the end of that phase.
I'm not a huge fan of this one.
It can be good, but the only time I think I would ever want to run this is if I'm running a lot of Vanguard veterans and I got them deployed on the battlefield. Because what I can do with my Raven Guard is I can pop them up, give them a Vanguard move turn 1, so now all of a sudden they're 9 inches forward. Or I can use my Master of Ambush ability to redeploy my Vanguard veterans up close, and now all of a sudden during my turn...
doesn't it only work on other characters? While a friendly chapter Phobos unit is within 6 inches of
it's Phobos only, yeah. So it would have to be like...
Phobos.
So it would have to be like Reavers can do it. Reavers are Phobos.
Yes, yeah.
So you could do it with Reavers by using that Vanguard trait, or you could use Master of Ambush to redeploy your Reavers. Reavers still aren't great units, but that's an example. You could use this with other things too, like your Lieutenant could do it, could utilize it, because it is a chapter Phobos unit. It's any unit, right? So any
chapter
Phobos
unit
within 6 inches. So, your Lieutenant, your Phobos Lieutenants, your Captain Lieutenant, stuff like that are all Phobos, can all benefit from this. It's kind of a niche thing, because it's generally not going to work for a lot of stuff, but like Kylon Shrike, he can benefit from it. There's a lot of cool little things you can do, but you don't see it utilized very often because you have to play a specific way to utilize this properly. And it's kind of a risk versus reward problem.
Yeah.
So Stealth Adept is the next one on this list. Unless the Warlord is the closest eligible target, you cannot target it with ranged attacks. This is pretty awesome because this is the character rule the old way.
Yes.
So this is the old Lookout Sir. Lookout Sir now requires you to have 3 models within range of it, within 3 inches of it, in order to be able to keep it from getting shot at, or a vehicle, I think a vehicle or monster, right, something like that, within range of it to keep it from being shot at a specific, and they have to have a certain number of wounds or something like that too. Vehicles not so much, but if they're characters and they have a vehicle or monster keyword, then they have to be over a certain number of wounds.
Yeah, that's why.
So Stealth Adept, what that does is it basically means your character cannot be targeted, period. as long as you've got something between you and them.
Yep.
Put one of your units in between, and you are free to move around and do whatever you want without ever having to worry about getting hit. It's pretty solid. A lot of the sniper rules won't affect this because they get around Lookout Sir, but they don't get around this particular rule. So your snipers still won't be able to target him, which is awesome. So target priority is the next one. In your command phase, you can select one friendly chapter Phobos unit within 6 inches of the Warlord until the end or start of your next command phase. Each time a model in that unit makes a range attack, you add 1 to their hit roll. This is always cool because you can give Phobos ballistic skill 2. But generally, the only time you're ever going to be able to utilize this is on things like infiltrators, or what's the other ones? The ones that lay down the mines, the haywire mines.
Yeah, infiltrators and
Incursors? Is that the name?
I think
Incursors. Yeah, they're incursors.
Yes, incursors.
So those are both Phobos units.
Yep.
So you can give them ballistic skill 2, which is really the only way to make them any good at shooting, because their shooting's pretty trash for the most part.
They have like basic bolters.
They're like
They have
bolters.
like a special rule, like ignore cover.
Like I think infiltrators on 6s, like auto wound or something like that, which is fine.
Yeah, incursors ignore armor, and then yeah, infiltrators auto one at 6s.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's a basic bolter.
Yeah. So they're, I don't know, target priority can be good if you're running a lot of them, or if you're focusing on a specific, like you got a full unit of them. It can be kind of fun. If you don't want to run intercessors, that's a good way to get around it. But the problem is generally the way Marines normally want to play, target priority rarely is going to be able to be utilized because there's not a whole lot of Phobos units that you have available that can utilize this properly. And units like Eliminator, or not Eliminators, but Eliminators. Eliminators don't need it. They already have 2-ups. They're ballistic too, so like who cares? They get +1 to hit too, which is another thing that's keeping crazier. So they're hitting on ones. So there's a lot of reasons why you're never going to take this, but primarily it's because of the fact that the only time you're ever really going to utilize it is on units you don't really care about whether or not they hit, because they're not designed to kill stuff. They're designed to push units out further. They're designed to hold objectives, stuff like that. So it's not a super great Warlord trait in terms of that. But if you do want to utilize these units in like full squads, then all of a sudden it becomes kind of interesting. So, last one in this list here
Marksman.
is a
I
Master
really like
Marksman.
this one.
Yeah, well, go for it. Talk about it.
Add 1 to the damage characteristics of ranged weapons this warlord is equipped with, excluding grenades and relics.
Right.
So, yeah, for obvious reasons, not having a relic that has +1 damage, rein that in a little. But still, there's a lot of weapons that you can equip when you're your warlord with.
Well, it's got to be Phobos, and that's the problem, because
No.
well, Phobos
Vanguard.
Phobos
Yep.
can only take these, so it's your warlord has to be Phobos, unfortunately. So it limits what weapons you can take, but
It limits it, but they do have a lot of good weapons.
yeah, and I was going to say specifically, the Phobos weapons are great with this warlord trait because they can target characters for the most part. A lot of them are like character killing sniper rifles, stuff like that.
And this can bump them up to like damage 3, doesn't it?
You can get the guy up to damage 4. I think the captain up to damage 4 if you do it right.
Ooh.
Which is pretty scary.
There are definitely a couple characters that only have 4 wounds, like a Technomancer for Necrons.
Yep.
Oh, hey, did you fail 1 single save? You're dead. You're down.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
Yeah, things that aren't like buried in wounds. These like Raven Guard characters specifically, they do a real good job of being able to strip stuff. It doesn't work for relics. Like it says, it excludes relic weapons and stuff.
Relics and grenades.
However, you can take a relic that allows you to fire the Corvidari bolt, which adds, I think it's like, allows you to target stuff that you can't see, essentially. Well, all of a sudden, your Oculus Bolt Carbon or whatever that like is a character killer. It's normally only like 2 or 3 damage, something like that. Well, all of a sudden, it's like 1 single shot, but it can target stuff that can't be seen, which, how many things on the board can do that? How many sniper rifles can do that? None. And then you take this Master Marksman on top of it, all of a sudden you're like icing characters that are invisible.
Yep.
Essentially.
I'm going to hide behind this building. Still not safe.
Right. So,
Still not safe for me.
They made it so it's balanced. Like if you could get up to 5 damage, I think it would be like way overpowered. Because then all of a sudden you're like icing captains and stuff right off the bat. That's kind of unreasonably strong.
Yeah.
Even for 1 shot, but it's one of those things where it's like, it makes your opponents think about what they're doing with their stuff when they know they got a threat like this on the board. So, and the Vindicare Assassin's always out there too. You can throw him in a list, and your opponent's like, oh, well, I'm not getting my Vindicare. I'm not going to let this Vindicare shoot my character to death. Oh, well, now all of a sudden there's this other character that's like, okay, well, you put him behind cover. No problem. I can still shoot him.
I think there are a lot of players out there who really want to go with that sniper vibe and get that one shot, one kill type of character on the table.
Yeah.
And this is one of the ways to help really get you as close as possibly can to it.
Yeah. When I started building this Raven Guard army, the one thing I wanted to focus on the most was packing as many lightning claws and as many sniper rifles into this list as I could. So I bought a ton of scouts, all with sniper rifles. I maxed out on eliminators. I maxed out on all the characters that could take like the special, like sniper type weapons and stuff like that. And back then, it was easy to ally in. This is back in 8th edition. It was easy to ally in. This is before the doctrines and all that came out even. It was easy to ally in with other units. So I would ally in with Imperial Guard and then just run a boatload of ratlings as well. So now all of a sudden I got like 50 snipers on the board that all can mortal wound characters, mortal wound whatever they shoot at. And it really turns it into a force of like, oh my gosh, this is scary. Because now, all these mortal wounds are coming at your units. Your units are not going to survive that for long. But what I found out was that sniper rifles can't kill everything.
No.
Mortal wounding is great and all, but like if you don't roll sixes, you're ending the game pretty quick and not in your favor.
They try though. I mean, I love my death marks, and I've had games where I shoot them at night, and it's like, oh, 4 mortal wounds, sure, sure,
yeah,
that's good.
Yeah, and they're fun to play. Snipers, I think, are great still. So, all right, so that covers all of the Vanguard chapter tactics. Mars, you want to run through a few of these? I think
chapter warlord traits.
They moved all the ones from the new books, like Dark Angels and Blood Angels and all that. They moved those all into their own books, and I think they might have reworded them. So I wouldn't go over those ones. But all the other ones are still relevant. So
yeah, so White Scars have Deadly Hunter. After this warlord makes a charge move, you can select one enemy unit within 1 inch of it and roll a d6 on a 2+. That unit suffers 1 mortal wound. Cute, but I don't know how really good that is. It's 1 mortal wound. It even has a chance to fail. That seems so awkward. I really feel like there's much better warlord traits in this one.
Sure, yeah.
We're skipping over Space Wolves. Imperial Fists. They have Architect of War. This is an aura. While a friendly Imperial Fist core unit that is receiving the benefits of cover is within 6 inches of this warlord, each time an attack with an armor pension characteristic of -1 is allocated to them, they treat it as 0 instead. So it basically gives you the Salamander chapter trait, but in like an aura around your lord. So that can be very good.
Yeah.
I feel it's very defensive, which, I mean, the Imperial Guard do. Or not Imperial Guard, Imperial Fists. Yeah. They already do that. But like we were talking about earlier, it forces you to be a very turtle, gun line, and might not be the best for what your Space Marines are trying to do. Crimson Fists, refuse to die. The first time this warlord is destroyed, you can choose to roll a 1d6 at the end of the phase instead of using any normal rules that trigger when it is destroyed. And on a 4+, this warlord is put back up as close as possible, 1 inch away from the enemy with D3 wounds remaining.
Right.
So this is a pretty neat one. You basically just get a warlord trait that keeps your character kind of turns him a little bit of a Gilliman. Because this is similar like that.
Yeah. Is it automatic? It's a 4+, right?
It's automatic,
so
but it is a 50-50.
It's almost exactly like Gilliman's.
Yeah, but as soon as you die, it triggers.
Like Gilliman gets back up on D6 wounds back. Well, this is D3, so it's like a mini version of Gilliman's.
Yeah, it's like a mini version. It's a neat one, but again, like, it's only going to come up once during the game, if at all.
Yeah.
So I'd much rather have some sort of aura that's boosting the rest of my army.
Yeah.
It is a neat little trick. It turns it into like a Gilliman or a Necron or what's her name from the
Celestine.
Celestine. Yep.
Well, I think it's fun because if you make a mistake with your character, you're not necessarily going to pay the price. Or if your opponent comes with something you're not prepared for, like a sniper, which theoretically could kill your character, well, all of a sudden now you have an opportunity to kind of figure out the problem and get your character back to keep chugging along, essentially. And so I think it's good. The problem is again, there's so many things in the game that you don't, there's things that can happen, but more often than not, your character is going to be protected, and you're never going to have to worry about this ever being a problem to begin with, especially if you're placing things properly and you know your opponent's rules and all that stuff too. So.
Yep. The Black Templars have Oathkeeper. This warlord is eligible to perform heroic intervention within 6 inches.
Yeah.
And 5 inches and horizontally and 5 inches vertically of an enemy. Yep. And each time the warlord makes a heroic intervention move, it can move up to 6 inches instead of 3.
Yeah.
Wait, what's that?
So what it does is allows them to heroically
so,
intervene 6 inches, and when they do make the move, they can move up to 6 inches.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So it took me a second.
It's okay. It's not good. it's not bad, but the problem is that there's only a couple of characters you would ever want to use this on.
Yeah.
Helbrecht could maybe utilize it, but the problem is he already has his own.
Yeah.
The Emperor's Champion gets this one, which is fine for him,
Yep.
but you don't want him to be your warlord, so it's like, maybe if I have an extra warlord trait to work with, sure, but generally, the things you want to take your warlord for, or take, the thing you are going to take as your warlord, you're never going to need this. So
you're never gonna you're just gonna be in 3, or you have a different warlord trait.
well, and Templars always are charging. Why do they care about being able
Heroic
to intervene? Because they don't ever need to intervene. They're just busy going forward all the time.
It's not a very good one.
Yeah.
I don't see you utilizing it to even really surprise your opponent, because
I mean,
they know you're going to have this, and it's like, oh well, I just have to stay 6 inches away instead of 3 now.
It's like a deterrent that you're probably never going to use.
Yep.
So it's not that it's bad. It's just that
It's like a very obvious trap.
if there were so many other things off the table, then maybe I'd consider it. But the problem is there's too much already available otherwise.
Blood Angels we can skip over. Flesh Tearers. Iron Hands. Adept of the Omnici. At the end of the movement phase, unless this warlord is a Tech Marine... Unless it's Tech... Oh, okay. You can repair one friendly Iron Hands vehicle model within 1 inch of it. That vehicle regains 1 lost wound. Each model can only be repaired once per turn. If the warlord is a Tech Marine, then each time it uses its Blessing and Homicide ability, it repairs D3 plus wounds instead of plus 3.
Yeah.
So either you can turn a character into a tiny Tech Marine, or it makes your Tech Marine better.
Way better. Because it's D3 plus 3, right?
D3 plus 1.
Plus 1.
So it makes the average a lot better.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Minimum you're getting 2, and at best you're getting 4. But what makes this so great is that they also have a stratagem as well that can also be utilized to heal on top of that.
Yes.
Now, I think there was a third thing that they had before that they were able to utilize, but they cut that off and they said, well, you can't use this if you use this. So
yeah, you were able to heal Dreadnoughts twice, and they said no, only once.
Yeah,
Ever,
but
once.
one thing that is nice though is that they made it so.
Oh, it was a psychic power, wasn't it?
Something like that, yeah.
I think it was a
but now you got so if you got multiple vehicles that are taking wounds, now you can kind of spread out a little bit and still heal them back up with quite good efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Tech Marines are only popular really in Iron Hands,
Which who are the only people who can take
so it makes it perfect for them.
It makes it perfect for them.
It's kind of like.
And then their vehicles have that treat your wounds as double. Yeah. So even if you roll bad and you only get 2 on this, it's essentially like you're getting 4 because of your damage table chapter tactic.
Right. Yeah. So it's a good one. I mean, I think it's a decent enough one to where a lot of Iron Hands players, if they were, as long as
it's
you're
definitely a strong consideration for them.
It's good to go for. Yeah.
Yep.
Ultra Smurfs.
Ultra Smurfs, Adept of the Codex. While this warlord is on the battlefield, each time you spend a command point to use a stratagem, you can roll a d6 on a 5+. That command point is refunded.
Yeah.
Very solid. More command points are not bad at all.
Well, and Ultramarines love command points because
Ultramarines
they're
love command
so
points.
good at getting it. Marnius Calgar gives 2, Gilliman gives 3.
Gilliman just has this one inherently, doesn't he? For his warlord trait? I think he has to take this one.
Yeah, I think something like that. But if you take him as a warlord, you get plus 3 CP too.
Yeah.
So it's
And then you're refunding CP.
Yeah, this army just Ultramarines loves having their CP, so it's easy for them to get it. This is a great trait for them because it's kind of an all-around trait where it's generalized. You're always going to be able to utilize it. There's nothing bad about it, so good CP back's always a good thing.
Yep. Very, very solid one. Salamanders, Anvil of Strength, add to the strength characters of this warlord.
Yeah.
This is pretty subpar. Now, the Salamanders themselves are a great chapter. This warlord trait, I feel like there's definitely better things you can use. Either you probably already have a weapon that's going to be like strength 8. So do you really need to be like strength 10 on top of this?
Yeah.
Or if you're not taking, like say you just have a simple chainsword, now you're strength 6 instead of 4. Which, okay, I wound 1 better
Yeah.
with this one guy. How good is that really?
Well, I think, yes, if it was like +1 to wound or +2 to wound, then it might be
I'd
worth
like that
considering.
better.
But extra strength, I mean, salamanders want to be more durable. They don't want to be more strong in combat. They don't need that. It's not.
No, yeah.
It's not super useful for them. So I mean, yes, there are ways you can utilize it and still be pretty good, but it's unnecessary because there's other things you can take that salamanders want to do instead. So yeah, I don't think it's definitely not one of my favorite ones.
Nope.
Maybe if it was like on Black Templars, then I'd consider it because Black Templars have ways to get lots of pluses for strength. So then it could be kind of fun because all of a sudden your strength go from strength 4 to strength 8 or something like that. That's cute, but yeah, for them it's just
the only thing I really like about it is you're not locked out of using it with relics.
Yeah.
So you can take a relic which might have like a strength 4,
Right.
which is kind of weak.
Yep.
All of a sudden it has a strength 6.
That's right. Yeah.
So
That's true.
that's kind of neat.
All right, so we're getting the Raven Guard one.
Yep.
Echo of the Raven Spire.
Echo of the Raven Spire. Once per battle, at the end of the movement phase, this warlord can vanish into the gloom as if it is more than 6 inches away from any models. If it does, remove it from the battlefield and put it in a reinforcement, and subsequent turns it can come in 9 inches away from enemies.
Yeah.
If at the end of the battle the warlord is not on the battlefield, he is destroyed.
Yeah.
So I've seen these rules a couple times where you can just jump into reserve and then come in later. I'm not a fan of them because, yeah, it's in the movement phase. So you're giving up a turn of fighting, causing damage, scoring points to come in later. And I just don't really understand these. Outside of the realm of, like, maneuverability.
So this particular ability does 2 things for the army, and I think it's a good trait, and it's worth considering if you're running Raven Guard for 2 reasons. Primarily, one is because it kind of works like a teleport homer, where if you get your character up the board and you need to engage on all fronts, or you need to reposition him somewhere, you can pull him off the board, put him in another spot to where you want him, or drop him back into more of your units to give your units buffs again. So that's nice. The other half of it is if for some reason you get your character into harm's way, and your character's in a spot where he's really going to be in some trouble if you don't get him out of there that turn, when all of a sudden you get him off the board out of trouble and then reposition him the following turn into a spot where he's more protected. That's particularly the 2 reasons why you want to utilize this. It can be kind of interesting. One thing I think I've used it 1 game before where I had, it was one of my lieutenants came down, dropped down, charged into combat, shredded something apart, killed like a character or something like that, and then the next turn, and then popped back up in his following turn 4 or something like that, he pops back up again, kills another character off. So I'm taking out targets that I need to be able to take out throughout a game, like for assassinate, some other purposes like that, where it can be effective. The problem is that, like you said, there's that turn in between where you got to kind of wait before you can utilize it again. So you are giving up a turn for something.
Yes.
It's more of a utility tool than anything, which is why it's only once per game. Because if you could do it every turn, it'd be like, well, what the hell?
Well, you could do it like max twice a game because of how turn order works.
Right.
But yeah, like I definitely understand the appeal of being able to jump to reserve and come down somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like I love my Veil of Darkness, but this isn't a Veil of Darkness because there's that turn in between there.
Well, you're not pulling
which
other units either, too.
Yeah, you're also not pulling another unit.
Yeah. Let's be real. It's not as effective as some of those things like Veil of Darkness, Gate of Infinity. I mean, there's even a librarian, Phobos librarian ability that allows you. I think it's called what is it called? No, Shadow Step, I believe, is the actual one where you can make a
so.
character teleport. You can pick a character to teleport that character somewhere else on the board. You know, that's exactly what this does, but it does it with a psychic power instead, which is solid. But the problem is now all of a sudden you got to take a library and and utilize a power that you might not want to. So it's kind of a cool little tool to have, especially if you're kitting a list to be able to do that kind of stuff. It probably doesn't come up as much as I think it would ever. It doesn't come up often enough to where I want to run this on a regular basis.
So I want to like it, but I would like to see it if either it was
the same
like
turn.
the same turn, or like it was done in like the charge phase or something. So you could at least like shoot and then vanish,
Right.
and then come back the next turn.
Yeah, or this is almost perfect for like the Harlequins have a trait where something similar to this, where like they can move a unit after they fought in combat. Well, it's like all of a sudden if your Raven Guard character can jump in, fight in combat, kill what it needs to, and then jump off the board, come in the following turn, well, all of a sudden it's like, wow, that's actually really good. So this is almost there. It's just kind of setting it back a little bit too far to making it so it's not quite as good as it could be.
Yep.
So
Then we have a Death Watch one, but we can go over that when we do Death Watch.
which one is that? Is it the Invuln one?
No, reroll one was the one.
So you pick a core. It's a Death Watch core unit within 6 inches of the Warlord, and each time down the battlefield until the start of your command phase, each time a model in that unit makes an attack against the enemy with that battlefield roll, reroll a wounded roll of 1. So it kind of gives your captain the lieutenant ability as well, which is kind of cute, I guess, but it only works for a specific battlefield type. So like infantry.
Well, no, it's troop, elite, fast.
Oh yeah. So it's good, but it's only as good as long as those units are on the board within range and all that. So it's kind of it's hit or miss or whether or not you can utilize it. So okay, so moving into relics.
Some relics.
Yeah,
They got some good relics.
You want to go over them or do you want me to?
I'll talk about the Teeth of Terra.
There you go.
So the Teeth of Terra model, Astartes model with the chainsword, the iconic chainsword. It gives it replaces the chainsword and gives it +1 strength, AP 2, flat 2 damage, and the bearer when it fights makes 3 additional attacks with this weapon.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a power sword with 1 less AP, +1 damage, and +3 attacks. It is awesome.
It is so good, and it's a chainsword.
And chainswords are free.
You don't have to pay points for this thing.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's one of the better relics Marines get. It makes your characters pretty awesome in combat. Yeah, this thing is great to take on pretty much any character you throw it on.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I love the Teeth of Terra. I struggle to find better weapons, or I should say, I struggle to find a weapon that a relic actually boosts its stats this much, like even in comparison, like not even close. It's very, very good for what you get, and the fact that it's a chainsword's free, it's like, well, wow,
Why wouldn't
really?
you?
3 extra attacks, 2 damage, -2 AP, as opposed to -1, and then strength +1, which is a power sword now.
Yep.
It's insane.
Like most things that give you an abundance of extra attacks usually have like low AP or low damage.
Yeah.
Not in this case.
Yeah. Okay. So Armor Dominus, this is a good one. This gives you +1 to your wounds. You get a save character, 2+, which is just kind of standard. And I think once per game, right? Yeah. So once per game, you get a 3-up invuln save. Does this one still require the Storm Shield? No, it doesn't. Okay. So yeah, this is great for taking on lieutenants and stuff like that. So all of a sudden you give your unit a 3+ invuln save with a 2-up base save and then +1 to their wound, which lieutenants it's perfect for. It's a good relic. I've utilized it quite a bit. Here's the one that replaces the Storm Shield. The Shield Eternal, which gives you a 4+ invulnerable save, add 1 to your armor saving throws, just like the regular Storm Shield. And each time the bearer would lose a wound, you get a 5+ feel no pain. 5+ feel no pain in addition to everything else you get. It's pretty great for most characters, so it's solid. It's probably not utilized now as much as it used to be in the past,
You know.
because in the past it actually was a little better, but it's still pretty good. So
A couple characters already have like a 4-up invuln, like your captain and I believe your chaplains.
yeah,
So this wouldn't really be good on them. I don't even know if they can necessarily get storm shields. So,
right.
but yeah, it's going to be on your lesser ones like your lieutenants and stuff. They'll make great use out of this.
Like if I was to throw this on something, I'd probably throw it on a Blade Guard captain.
Yeah.
Because now all of a sudden they get a 5 Feel No Pain. They're already durable as heck, so now all of a sudden they're really durable. It's pretty decent. The problem is really the only thing you're gaining out of it is a 5 Feel No Pain out of it, which is good, but it's kind of like how good, you know?
Yeah, both the armor Indominus and the shield eternal, they make your character very durable. Which again, characters are already generally protected by the lookout, sir.
Right.
So
Yep.
got to kind of balance how much use are you going to get out of these things.
Right, yeah. All right, so Standard of the Emperor Ascendant. I love
Yes.
this relic. I take this on my Ancient a lot. This basically adds 3 inches to the range of their banner ability, boosting that to 9 inches, which is awesome. That's the best part of this rule.
Area effect is essentially doubles it.
Yeah. And then each time a morale test is taken for a chapter core unit within range of it, you can reroll the test. So basically makes them so they're not immune to morale, but much harder to fail morale than
They get
before.
their old, they shall know no fear.
Yeah, so the banner by itself gives +1 leadership as in just normal ancient. But now all of a sudden, now you're allowed to re-roll your tests as well. Makes it pretty hard for you to fail.
And then if you
leadership
still do
tests.
fail, you still have ignore all attrition
That's right. Yeah. So,
modifiers.
It makes your Marines a little bit more. They're more likely to stick around. So.
Yep.
But the primary reason to take this relic is so that it boosts your aura range. And
Yes.
when your aura range is 9 inches, you get a lot more coverage. And if you run the army the way I like to, especially with that like Rights of War and all those other abilities, it's the Bear as a starter banner ability range, which gives that when a unit goes, model gets shot and killed, and they go down on a 4-up, they get to shoot. That extra coverage allows me to spread my units out further, and all of a sudden everything's being able to shoot when they die. So it's very good. It's not the best relic in here, but for what you get out of it, it's pretty awesome.
Yep.
So you want to talk about Primarch's Wrath?
Yeah, Primarch's Wrath. Model equipped with a bolt gun, mastercrafted bolt gun, or special enemy bolt carbine. It's a relic that replaces that. It's rapid fire 2, strength 5, AP 2, 2 damage.
Yeah.
It's fine. Generally, like your mastercrafted bolter already kind of has a very similar stat line already.
Very similar. Strength 4, AP -1 probably, and then
flat 2 damage.
Yeah. It's a good relic. It's rapid fire 2,
It's good.
which I think is kind of a question mark. So this is the way I look at it. It's basically the Grey Knights Stormbolter with the stratagem that they have, which pushes it to strength 5 and then -2, and then the 2 damage they get from the boosted whatever the tide. So that's basically what it does. It unlocks you to be able to have a strength 5 AP -2 damage, basically a 4-shot Marine killer. That's what it's there for. With your doctor bonus, it becomes AP -3, so all of a sudden it's pretty good. It's good, but it's not.
It's
Super
good, but I don't know how much of a boost it is from its regular weapons to really warrant it.
Yeah, its problem is that it takes up a relic slot that you just really normally can't afford to spend CP on for something like this. So it's not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just that you don't, you're not going to spend the CP or the relic slot on it.
You might just be better off taking like the Teeth of Terra.
Yeah. Well, you'd definitely be better off taking the Terra. Yes.
Yep.
100%.
Moving on to the Burning Blade.
Burning Blade is the Emperor's sword, essentially. It's a strength +3, AP -5, 2 damage replacement for your power sword or mastercrafted power sword. Blade Guard captains can take this. Blade Guard lieutenants can take this. Regular captains with Gravis armor can take
who
this.
can't take this?
Anybody who doesn't have a sword.
Which is
Phobos captains.
Phobos captains, yeah.
Phobos lieutenants. But yeah, pretty much everybody else can.
Pretty much everyone.
Thing is if you can take a power sword, you can take this, and it's awesome because it makes you strength 7, AP -5, 6 with the doctrine, and then 2 damage. You just rip through stuff really fast, especially infantry. So say goodbye to anything that was in your way.
No.
The problem is unlike the Teeth of Terra, it doesn't add any extra attacks. So
No.
the Teeth of Terra gives you so many extra attacks that you're just so loaded on attacks. It just shreds through units really fast. Where this is kind of like,
Yeah.
it will, when you do hit and do wound, it's going to hurt like nothing else. The problem is you got to get to that point before all of a sudden now you're stripping saves and doing a lot of damage. I mean, you'll outright kill Marines with this thing, sure, but
Yeah. So I feel it's a very niche weapon. You're going to want to be able to use it to its maximum effect, which is against units that have like
no
armor,
inbound saves.
no inbound saves,
Yeah.
and they have like 2 or 3 armor.
Yeah.
So you can just ignore that outright.
That's right. Yep, that's definitely true.
Whereas like the Teeth of Terra, it doesn't have as much AP, but it gives you more attack, so you can just dig through it.
Yeah. Well, and since we're talking about AP, again, when you go into your doctrine, it becomes AP -3. It is literally a power sword with 2 damage and 3 extra attacks.
Yep. Whereas like the Burning
That's
Blade
awesome.
would go to AP6. When are you
How
fighting?
often do you need AP?
How often are you fighting something with 1
It
up
needs to be
armor
something
in melee?
It needs to be something with like a 2-up that gets heavy cover or dense. Is it dense cover? Dense cover. Heavy cover. Right. Heavy cover is the one that gives you the +1.
Heavy cover.
And then they also would have to get another +1 modifier in order for you to completely strip.
Yeah.
So that's the only time that the AP6 would really make a
Yeah,
difference.
it's overkill.
But yeah, I mean, it's still cool. It's a great sword.
It's
but
a great sword. I'd almost rather see it like lower AP and damage 3, but
yeah, if I was going to run this thing, what I would do is I would take the Teeth of Terra first, and then take another character alongside it and fill this guy, fill
Burning
this sword
Blade.
in.
Yep.
So now all of a sudden I got 2 real nasty characters that are.
The Strength 7 feels a little awkward.
Yeah.
You might be able to combine this with like the Salamander's Warlord trait, and then you'd be looking at Strength 9.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty cool.
This is also really good on
Go up,
Black.
stab a Land Raider.
Yeah. Well, and we were talking about champions before, and Black Templar is another thing that can utilize it. Hellbreak gives +1 to strength, so now all of a sudden you become strength 8. The champions can be all of a sudden strength 10, 11, so toughness 5, toughness even almost 6, depending on what you're using it against. Are still wounding on 2s. That's pretty insanely strong. And you'll just butcher through vehicles, especially small vehicles, pretty quickly, because they just won't get saves.
Yep.
So,
Well, hell, Knights don't get invulns in close combat.
right.
That's great use of it.
Yeah. So I mean, you can utilize it to
But
chop
like I
some
said,
stuff.
you'd have to combine it with like something else. Otherwise, you'd be wounding the Knight on 5.
Right. Yeah. By itself, it's probably not worth taking. But like if you pair this up with
you can
something
pair it
else,
up
it's
pretty
kind of
good.
interesting. Right. Blood Angels. If you could take this in Blood Angels, then that
Oh yeah,
that
+1 to
be-
wound.
Yeah.
Oh,
That
yeah.
would be pretty interesting.
Oh,
too,
yeah.
but- All right. So moving into Purgatorus.
Purgatorus. So model equipped to the bolt pistol, heavy bolt pistol, mastercrafted issue bolt pistols.
Yes.
It
pistols.
replaces that. It's 18-inch range, pistol 3, strength 5, AP 3, and damage 2.
Yeah.
This is a hell of an upgrade to a pistol.
It's a great version of a pistol.
Yes.
Its problem lies with the fact that it's still a pistol.
The problem lies with it's still a pistol. Now the range 18 is nice. Range 18 reaches out a bit.
Yeah.
And then pistols can still be used in close combat. It's
That's
an
true.
aspect I feel isn't given enough appreciation.
true.
Like when you're in combat and you get to shoot and then still fight in the fight phase.
Yeah.
It's really nice to have.
Yeah.
It's
Especially when you have
AP3.
units that can't fall back.
In the assault doctrine, it'll be AP4. An AP4 pistol that does flat 2 damage.
Yeah.
I love this
Outright
thing.
Butcher's Marines. Goodbye.
I think the only bad thing to say about it is, yeah, it's a pistol. It's a little short range, and it is competing for other relic slots.
Yeah. Yeah. My only real complaint about the thing is the fact that it's a pistol relic. So you're eating up a relic slot for something that essentially may never get used, and even if it does,
Possibly.
even if it does get used, it's like 3 shots per turn. It may not do anything at all. You'd have to put this on the right character and have the right utilization in mind in order to make sure it gets used. So otherwise, you're just kind of wasting a relic. All right, so Relic Bearer of Glathamore. I actually use this once in a while. The bearer has the following ability. It's an aura, and when a enemy psychic unit with 18 inches, you subtract 1 from psychic tests from the unit, which is pretty good. It's like a boosted psychic good. And each time the psychic test is, and this is actually in addition to the psychic good.
Yep.
So this could be -2 all of a sudden. And then each time a psychic test is failed, roll a d6 and a 4+, they suffer d3. So when they fail a psychic test, now all of a sudden they're taking perils.
Oh, yeah.
All I have to do is fail a test. And when you got like a Q-Lexus running around and a Psyker that's got this, when your Psyker's within an 18-inch range, that Psyker could, now all of a sudden they're like, -1, -2 cast, and they're taking a bunch of mortal wounds when they fail their cast.
Yep.
This relic here literally shuts down Thousand Sons armies.
It does. It's really good anti-Psyker weapon. I like it a lot. Only bad things I can say about it is it's Primaris only.
Yep.
So I think that's only like 2 models in your book.
Well, it's a
That can
Phobos
it has
Librarian.
It has to be a Primaris Psyker.
Yeah, so Phobos Librarian and then
Right.
Phobos.
No, just Primaris.
It's any it's any.
Yeah, okay, so it doesn't have to be a Psyker.
Yeah.
So you can put this on a Primaris.
It just works better.
So,
on
forgot what I said.
Psychers.
And then, like I said, you're not going to take this as your first relic. You're going to spend your CP to take it because you might not be fighting Psychers.
Yeah.
And then it's useless.
And even if you are, I mean, you got to be within 18 inches, so it's still you still struggle.
A little short.
But the reason why I like this is primarily because I have a tendency to, for whatever reason, end up against Thousand Sons armies. And it is hilarious to watch them be like, okay, well, I'm just not going to cast anything this turn because if I do, all of a sudden I'm going to lose my models.
And go blow my head off. Yeah.
And keep in mind, this is any time a psychic test has failed. Each time a psychic test. So if they got 3 powers or 2 powers,
Yep.
and they keep failing, well, all of a sudden they're blowing their models up on a, 4+?
Yep.
Yeah, that's nuts. Magnus could almost like half himself in one turn. In addition to if he rolls any perils. So this is in addition to perils. So
I mean, it does have to fail, which is hard for Magnus to do, but still, it's a possibility.
well, like I said, you run the Q-Lexus, for instance, and then throw this with like a Phobos Librarian with a Psychic Hood in there.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden he's getting like -3, -4 to cast, and with that big of a minus, when he does fail, which he probably will, assuming you don't deny it, now all of a sudden every time he fails, he's taking D3 mortal wounds on a 4-up. Now, if he also rolls a perils in the process, he's perils of the warp in addition to taking another D3 on top of it. So he can take D6 mortal wounds instead. Theoretically, Magnus could one-shot himself by failing psychic tests if he perils 3 times in a row because of this.
Magnus?
Yeah.
3 times in a row?
He's at 18 wounds.
Yeah.
So if he fails 3 powers and he...
It's D3 mortal wounds.
D3, right. But
Yeah.
Perils of the Warp is also D3 mortal wounds.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So if he Perils of the Warps and takes this every time he fails a power, now all of a sudden he could potentially take up to 18 mortal wounds just from casting.
That's a lot of stars and planets to align
Well,
just right, but it is possible.
Yeah, no, I know it's a lot of things that need to go right, but
Yep.
Armies that have like Armin, which can cast 3 powers, it's really a real. It's a realistic thing that they can actually kill themselves just trying to cast nearby.
Yeah.
Demon Princes shuts them off.
Yep.
It's quite an interesting thing, and I've watched so many players just be like, okay, well, never
even
mind.
on the lower scale, what is it, like the Astropaths for Imgard, who only get like 1d6? It's
Right.
like get that weak junk out of
Yeah,
here.
you're not even casting it.
You're just not even doing it.
Yep. Well, and outright kill them too.
Yeah,
they only have 3 wounds.
they have 3 wounds. They could just outright kill them.
Yep. All right, so there's a Bellicose bolt rifle. This one's just like any other, like it's the bolter relic, another bolter relic. This is 24-inch range, assault 4, so it's 4 shots, which is cool.
Yep.
But it's strength 5, AP -1, 2 damage. It's not my favorite relic by any means.
No, I don't like this one.
It becomes AP -2 with the Doctrine, which is kind of nice. But
Strength 5, yeah. Like, I shouldn't have to rely on my Doctrine to make this high enough AP.
yeah.
Like, the AP1 just feels really low. Assault 4, okay, it gets 4 shots, that's kind of cool, but
Well,
it
it's a
replaces a gun that has 3 shots to begin with. So you're only getting 1 extra shot.
Yeah, I'm not...
Like, +1 strength, +1 AP, +1 damage.
I mean, I would argue any of the shooting relics in here probably aren't worth taking. This one's probably the least.
I personally would take the pistol over this thing, because
Yeah,
at
this
least
is-
that I can shoot in combat.
Right, this is the one I would probably least likely take.
Yeah.
So then there's the Lament. This is a heavy version. I think
The
this
Lament.
is Mastercrafted Stalker Bolt Rifles. Again, this is probably going to be utilized on the Raven Guard, or the Phobos Captain.
Yep.
You're going to swap this out with the Mastercrafted Stalker Bolt Rifle. Because I think the lieutenant gets the Oculus bolt carbon, right?
Yep.
Isn't that what he gets? And then this is one shot, strength 5, AP minus 2, 3 damage. And this one also pairs up with that warlord trait that adds a +1 damage. So now all of a sudden it becomes damage 4.
No, that doesn't work in relics.
Oh, you're right. It doesn't.
Yep.
So,
Otherwise, that'd be way too good.
well, is it 4 damage? That's not that great, but
What one-shotting characters? Not that good. Not that good.
well, it's got to be 5 damage to one-shot characters, but
Yeah.
I say that because I play against Marines. You know, against Tau, you're just going to outright kill all of them. But so each time an attack is made with this weapon, successfully would a target.
It's got the
inflicts a mortal
sniper.
wound. So it is. It's a sniper rifle.
Yep.
The only thing is that it does not allow you to target characters.
It doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
Stalker. Well, the Stalker bolter itself doesn't do that. Well, that makes
Well,
sense.
this replaces it. So yeah.
I know. But it's not replacing like a sniper rifle.
Right.
So,
It's just a better stalker bolt rifle.
yeah.
Which I mean, okay, fine, whatever.
Okay, fine. It's still a flat 3 damage gun. That's nice.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's heavy 1, so it'd be AP3 on turn 1 because of heavy doctrine.
Right. Yeah.
Nothing to sneeze at.
All right, so here's my favorite one for librarians. This is a Phobos unit only. It's called the Ghost Weave Cloak. And this actually
It replaces their camo cloak.
replaces the Camel Cloak. And so I think actually the Phobos, yeah, just the captain and the librarian are the only ones that can take it.
Yep.
Each time the bearer makes a normal move, advances or falls back, it can move across models if they were not there. And each time an attack is made against them, -1 to attacks. I don't use this all that often, but it's one of my more favorite ones for Phobos, especially for librarians. Just because it's kind of fun to give them -1 to hit, and they can now all of a sudden traverse over units, which is kind of cool. So it's not super great, but it's all right. Yeah, it's fine. Toma Malcador, though, was pretty good. That's the one we're talking about next. Now that one gives what, an extra psychic power?
An extra discipline. 1 additional psychic power from the discipline. Yep.
Yeah.
So 1 extra. I don't believe it allows you to.
Well, it's from a discipline it has access to. So actually, Phobos.
So it doesn't allow you to cast an additional 1, but another psychic power. So it gives you options.
Yeah. Well, what's cute about this is because normally your librarians cannot take from a different tree. They have to take everything from one tree. Now this
From
allows
any discipline it has access to.
Right. So now, like your Phobos librarians normally only get access. They get access to both psychic trees, but they can only take from one or the other. And the powers it's generally going to
Okay, I
take
see
from are going
what
to be
you're
the
saying.
Phobos tree. So now all of a sudden you can take Phobos psychic powers, and you can take the standard Marine psychic powers, which gives
Because
you
it still
one or the
technically
other.
has access to the standard.
Because they can
so-
access both. But when you choose your powers, you're only able to take one. Well, this allows you to take one from either or. So
Okay.
that's why it's nice.
Yeah, provided that's the way it works, that could be very useful.
Yeah. Since librarians cast 2 powers, it makes it work. So yeah, now all of a sudden you're casting 1 from each, and it's pretty great. So
Benediction of Fury. So chaplain model only. It replaces his Crozius.
yes.
Melee, +2 strength, AP2, flat 3 damage, and then each time the attack's made with a weapon, unmodified 6, inflicts a mortal wound in addition to normal damage.
Yeah.
This is a pretty good one.
Yes.
Brings him to what, strength 6?
Yeah.
He'll be AP3 in the Assault Doctrine. Flat damage 3 is really nice to have, though.
Yes, it is. And I think they have something actually can give him 4 damage, if I'm correct. Pretty sure it's the one of the chaplain. Maybe it's the super chaplain. Something gives them another +1. I don't remember what it was.
Okay.
+1 to damage.
So yeah, it's restricted to chaplains only. But it is a good weapon to have. Primarily because of that damage 3, plus a mortal wound if you roll a 6. So it can definitely one-shot one of the weaker characters that only have like 4 wounds.
I don't remember what it was, but there was something I think that gives it +1 to damage. So you can theoretically make this like damage 4, but that's irrelevant. The fact that this thing is strength 6, AP -2, AP -3 with the doctrine, 3 damage, and then 6 is deal mortal wounds, right?
Yep.
So even without all the extra buffs, the 6s do mortal wounds is pretty cool. And that chaplain on a bike, now all of a sudden that guy becomes a real nightmare.
Oh yeah.
And now I remember what gives the extra damage. There's a litany that gives you +1 strength, +1 damage.
Is there? Okay.
Yeah, and he casts it directly on himself. So
Okay.
That in addition to he can take a second litany, which is like litany of hate or litany of whatever, so now all of a sudden he can like reroll wounds and +1 wounds, stuff like that. So yeah, they become a real awesome beat stick in melee. Chaplain on bikes can be real scary, and the Benediction of Fury actually makes them pretty good. So yeah, good fun. It's actually especially good on Dark Angels. Dark Angels, Ravenwing, yes. So, okay. So honor.
The honor of Bahamut. Oh, excuse me.
This one gives the bearer the following ability. It's an aura. While the unit was when a friendly core unit within 6 inches of the bearer, each time they fight, the fight is resolved. Add 1 to the attacks carried to the models in that unit. This is not cumulative with Shock Assault. So what this does basically, it turns Shock Assault off for that unit. But now no matter what, whether they get charged or even if the combat just sustains, over the next turn, all of a sudden they still get the +1 to attack.
Yeah, I don't.
It's not super great.
I don't understand it too much.
Well, it's not great because of the fact that your army is almost always either going to be getting charged or charging.
Yep.
It's very rare where combats last long enough to where there's going to be multiple turns of nobody charging, which means that.
And then even in that case, you get an extra attack.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Well, it gives you Shock Assault indefinitely.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yep.
Whether or not you're charging or getting charged, or just standing stationary and still fighting.
I mean,
even for like.
You can give this to anyone. It looks like. So there's that.
Yeah, but the problem is all Space Marines already get it, so it's like, I'll get Shock Assault, so it's like kind of irrelevant. The only time you'd ever be able to utilize this is in a turn where you did a fight. The fight ended, the next turn comes around, you're still in combat, then you go to fight again, you still get the +1. Big deal. If the combat lasts past the first fight, generally the only reason you would want that to happen anyway is because of the fact that you want to keep them tied up, and that's the only real reason. So, it's not super great. I don't like it.
Don't like it.
Last one, Voxic Spiritum. It's Primaris model only, at 3 inches to the range of aura abilities, which is phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
It's great on the Apothecary. It's great on the Ancient. It's great on your Captain. It's great on your Lieutenant. It's great on every character you have access to. It is phenomenal. Anything that adds aura ranges is great. Being able to spread out a little further, being able to control your auras a little better, it's always a good thing. So this is, it's a great thing, especially if you're taking Primaris, a lot of Primaris. Your Primaris Captain, Primus Lieutenant, whatever. They're all able to kind of be able to move around and kind of skirt and do things they need to do to play their game while your other units can still play their game. So it's a great trait. I think it's good. I don't use it a ton, but if I do use it, it's generally going to be my Ancient or my Apothecary. So that's, where you're going to get the most effect out of it, I think.
Yeah.
So
especially on like your Chapter Master and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Those guys you've upgraded.
Well, think about it. You put on the Apothecary, and all of a sudden you got a 9-inch bubble for 6 up Feel No Pain. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
The Ancient, all of a sudden...
Should cover most of your army.
The Ancient with this and the trait, I think it's, the bonus he gets, right? Because it's not the relic, right? It's the trait that gives that for them. Yeah. Ancient's Warlord trait is 6 inches. Oh, God, what did we say? It was there was something that gave +3, right? Was it a Warlord trait? I don't remember what it was.
+3?
There was something that gave like a range that we were talking about. Gives a range on the banners, right? It was like +3 to range on the banners or something like that. I could have sworn it was the Chapter Ancient.
Well, I mean, this maxes at 9 anyway.
Yeah. It's funny because you had access to that and this, so it's kind of like, okay, interesting, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think you're getting no 12 range out of that. As cool as that would be.
Well, yeah, for good reason.
And then we got
we got several psychic power sheets. Librarius Discipline, which is a standard, and Obscuration, which is for Phobos specifically.
Yep.
So they're all pretty good. You
so
want to take our way, Mars?
Yeah, so for the Librarius Discipline, you have Veil of Time until the start of your next psychic phase. You can reroll advanced rolls and charge rolls made for that unit. Until the start of the next psychic phase, if that unit starts a fight phase within engagement range of an enemy unit, it fights first that phase. So that's a pretty neat one to be able to guarantee your unit is not only getting in there, but they're also fighting first. Really trying to eliminate the enemy before they get to hit back. Might of Heroes. Blessing. Warp Chart 6. Select one friendly core chapter unit or core character model within 12 inches of Psyker until the start of the next phase. Add one to that model's strength, toughness, and attacks characteristics. So this one I see being used a lot, especially when we go to like dreadnought characters.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden their dreadnoughts are toughness 8, sometimes 9.
Yep.
Yeah, which makes them incredibly tough. And then they get +1 strength and attack on top of it.
Yeah.
It's a really nice one to make your characters into real beat sticks.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Demon Prince thing, where it's just the opposite version. It's the Marine version. So all of a sudden, your Marine characters become pretty strong and durable, and you know it works on core or character, which is cool. And it's got a 12-inch range too, so there's nothing wrong with it in terms of what you get out of it. It's always been one of the more solid powers for Space Marines, so it remains a pretty good choice.
Oh yeah, well, especially turning like your heavy intercessors into toughness 6.
Yep.
Now lasguns wound you on 6s.
Right. Yep.
Nelzone is really good, but it's short range. Was it within 6 inches? The target unit cannot make saving throws until your next psychic phase.
Yeah, so basically this just turns off invuln saves, and then it also makes it harder for psychers to do stuff, right?
Yeah.
If an enemy psyker unit was at 6 inches, you half the total of psychic tests taken for that unit.
Yep.
So
So it really cuts down their ability to use psychic test too.
Yeah.
But it's only within 6 inches, so
Right.
you have to be right on top of them.
right.
Now we did have that one game where Cade shut off my invulns for my Silent King to great effect, but that was at 12 inches. So it was double the range. This one can be really hard to get off. But when it does, it can really turn our game around.
Yeah, back when librarians on bikes used to be a thing, I used to run a kamikaze bike where I just run him up the field, and I would drop Null Zone down on the librarian, run him like point blank into the enemy blobs, shut off all their invulns, and then literally fire across the table with everything I had, and blow everything up at long range, and they wouldn't get any invuln saves. So it is a good power if you can get it off.
Yeah. Because it's any unit within 6 inches, so it is like an aura.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the problem is you're basically sacrificing your unit to use it.
Yep.
And I think it was a warp charge 7, so it's not always easy to get off either.
Yeah.
So, not that warp charge 7 is hard to get off, but
It's average.
it's more than
50-50,
more
yeah.
than your base psychic powers, which are like 5 or 6.
Psychic Scourge, so Warp Valve 7, if manifested, select one enemy unit with an 18 invisible as Psyker, then roll a d6 and add the Psyker's leadership to the characteristic to the result. Your opponent then does the same, rolls a d6, add their leadership. If the total is higher than your opponent's, the selected unit suffers d3 mortal wounds. If it is equal, they suffer 1 mortal wound. If it is less, your opponent does nothing.
Yeah.
So it's a weird little kind of like extra smite. So you can smite and then do this for even more mortal wounds.
Yeah.
So that's nice.
I don't like this power primarily because of the fact that I play Grey Knights, and Grey Knights have Purge Soul, which is very similar to this. But Purge Soul has the potential to do a lot of mortal wounds, where this has the potential to do, at best, D3. So it's kind of like, no. It's also, Warp Charge 6, or Smite's a Warp Charge 5.
Yeah.
So yeah, you got to beat the leadership, and then even if you do, you may do
Yeah,
wounds,
yeah,
you
that's
may
the
not.
thing. You gotta cast it, and
So-
then you still have to beat the leadership.
It's not a great power per se. The nice thing about it is, you're not. It doesn't have to be the nearest visible unit. It's pick a unit within 18 inches that's visible to them.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be the nearest, so you can like pick out a character.
Yeah. So it becomes a targetable power, which is kind of nice. But again, it's only D3 mortal wounds, so it's like, it can be good, it can not be good, and it's reliant on whether or not you beat their leadership. So
Yep.
it's a problem.
Yep.
Yeah, Fury of the Ancients is another one.
Fury of the Ancients is another one. Warp value 6. Select one enemy model that is within 18 and visible as Psyker. Draw a line between the two models, and anything under that line will suffer a mortal wound.
Yep.
It's relatively weak unless you have like the correct positioning. Because yeah, you don't have to roll anything, so it does an automatic wound. But still, to like really get some value out of this, you're gonna need to have like 3 or 4 models under that line, which is possible, but it could be a little tough.
Yeah, it's hard to utilize because of the fact that it's 18 inches. Getting that lined up just perfectly to where you're covering a whole bunch of models into
Yep.
that line is kind of complicated. With that said, though, it has the potential to do more than like the average smite usually.
Yeah, but
So
it's spread out.
it can be interesting. The problem is you got to have your librarian a little closer than you'd probably like, and there's a good chance that you may not be able to get that perfect line where you're going to cover a whole bunch of models. So it's not a super great power, but it's okay. It's okay.
Yep. And then we have Psychic Sorceress, Blessing Aura, Warp Value 6. If masses until the next Psychic phase, while a friendly chapter unit was within 6 of the Psyker, it gets a 5-up envelope
Yeah.
save.
This is one of the best updates to
Yes.
psychic powers for Space Marines.
Yep.
In the past, it was like mortal wounds. You got like a 5-up final pain against mortal wounds.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden, it's a 5-up invulnerable save
5-up
for units that
invulnerable save.
otherwise don't get it.
This is really good.
That is awesome.
Really
It's massive for certain units.
Especially when you combine it with like Might of Heroes. So now the core unit's tougher and it is a 5-up invulnerable save.
Yeah. I think it's well. Might of Heroes is only for one model, but even then, it's a core model, character model. So it's only one, but
A friendly core or character model.
yeah. So
Like your core unit.
it's not,
or a
it
character
would say
model.
core unit or character model. It says a core or character model, so it has to be one model,
Huh.
which is kind of silly. But
I see what you're saying.
But
Weird.
at the same time, you could still put this
Weird.
on a character. Both these on a character make the character really durable. If they don't have, like a lieutenant, could all of a sudden become really good. Librarians don't naturally get invuln saves, so now your librarian can get it. But it's an aura, so now all of a sudden, it's any friendly unit within 6 inches of the Psyker gets a 5-up invuln. So, every unit within
Yeah.
6 inches of them all of a sudden
It's
gets
not
that
core,
5-up.
it's not infantry, it's everything chapter.
Yeah. So you take that librarian, throw that next to your ancient, throw it next to your apothecary, and all of a sudden you get 5-up invuln saves with 2 to 3-up base saves, 2-up, 1-up cover saves, and then all of a sudden, you get the 6-up feel no pains with when you die you get to fire. That's
Yep.
3 auras right there combined together that turn these characters or these units into like absolute
Yep.
monsters. Again, you run into the problem where like sometimes you can't utilize some of the auras. But the nice thing is the librarian can always follow another unit off somewhere else and still benefit them in this case.
Yep.
So 5-up invuln saves nothing to scoff at, especially if you got something shooting at your models that have really good AP.
Yep.
For instance, Hellblasters or anything with melted guns like Sisters. They'll strip your AP and you'll never get your saves. So Marines need their saves. 5-up invulns are pretty good, so nothing to complain about there.
I'm definitely a big fan of psychic powers, and I like to see the ones that are really able to utilize and change the course of the battle.
Yeah.
Because it is a little bit of a risk running psychers, but I like to see that kind of risk-reward factor in them.
Right.
Obscuring disciplines. So first up we have Shrouding, Warp Value 6.
Yeah.
A friendly chapter Phobos unit within 18 until the next psychic phase. Unless that unit is a close eligible target, enemy models cannot target that unit with range attacks.
They become untargetable. So if
Yep.
you want a unit protected, you put shrouding on them and they cannot be targeted.
So unfortunately it's only Phobos units,
Yes.
which...
Well, it
how-
limits certain units.
Yeah, how often do you need to protect your Phobos units?
What I would probably utilize it on more often than not is probably going to be eliminators. Because eliminators, when you're
Yeah.
sitting back on objectives, there's always going to be units in
They already
between
have
them.
those camo cloaks though.
And therein lies the problem, is I think they're already protected and
Yep.
defensible enough to where you're probably not going to lose them pretty quick. But with that said, if you got an opponent that sets up with the right type of weapon and shoots at them, they can strip you off that objective because you only get 3 eliminators per squad. So, in addition, infiltrators another thing too, where if you can like turn your opponent's ability off to be like, okay, well I'm going to shoot your infiltrators off an objective just because they're there and I need that objective, or to maybe try and help them out with grind them down, or what's the other one that it's the one that gives you if you have more objectives than your opponent, something like that.
Oh, domination.
There you go. So
Yeah.
it can help with stuff like that. So shrouding is good. It's just kind of situational,
Oh.
and it relies on you playing Phobos. And of course, obscuration is all about Phobos stuff. So
Yep.
it focuses on almost everything in here is Phobos related. So
Yep.
you know, you'll see these powers, and you'll have to kind of accept that. Okay, well, these are good powers, but they have to be utilized on Phobos specific units.
So Soul Sight, warp charge value is 6. Select one friendly chapter Phobos unit within 18. Phobos again. Until the next psychic phase, each time a model in that unit makes a ranged attack, you can re-roll the hit roll, and the target does not receive the benefit of cover for that attack.
Yep, strips of cover.
This is a very solid one. Was it the Infiltrators already do this? Or no, the Incursors.
Incursors do this.
They already do this with their guns, so obviously they're not a great target for it.
Yeah, Infiltrators it's okay on.
Yeah, Infiltrators who auto wound on 6s and ignore cover,
Yep.
and they get to re-roll their hit rolls, so they have better chances of getting their 6s.
Yeah, it's a decent power. If you're running a lot of Phobos, especially Infiltrators, this is a good power to take. So
I like it. It's very solid. Nothing that's gonna probably like make or break the game, but
and
it's
let's
helpful.
well, let's be real. Phobos, for the most part, have fallen off a cliff in terms of how much they're used in the game. But the thing is nothing's wrong with them. They're not bad at all. They're all pretty good. They're just some that are they're more the defensible type units, where like the Gravis and the newer Dominus type units, those are the more offensive. They're out in the open where Phobos like to stay covered and hidden. So that's kind of there's not you can still play Phobos and do just fine. So Mind Raid.
And then we have Mind Raid, warp charge value 7. Select one enemy model within 18 of the invisible of Psyker.
Yeah.
The model's unit suffers 1 mortal wound. If that model is a character, roll 3d6. If the result is equal to or greater than the model's leadership characteristic, you gain 1 command point.
Yep.
So yeah, gaining command points back is never a bad thing. You're probably going to have a hard time killing anything with this, but I mean, a mortal wound's not to sneeze at. You still have to beat their leadership too.
Yeah.
I don't know how often I'd be taking this one.
Yeah.
Because you only have access to like 2 psychic powers?
Normally, yes, yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of competing.
I mean, I like the psychic power. The problem is you can't rely on you getting command points back, and it has to be a character within 18 inches. So
Yes.
there's a good chance, like, there's a lot of these kind of abilities that give you CP back, but this one is limited because there's a good chance that you're probably not going to be able to utilize it for 5 turns, where a lot of some of the other ones, you probably will get that CP back for 4 or 5 turns. Look at Grey Knights, on a warp charge of 7, they just get a CP for free.
Yep.
Where this one, you actually got to, you have to have a character within 18 inches. You got to roll 3d6, beat their leadership. It only does a mortal wound, so it's probably not killing whatever it's casting it on. Yeah. And at best
You might
gain
strip
a
off
CP.
the last wound, but yeah.
Like, this would be cute if it did like D3 mortal wounds and then potentially gave you a command point.
It's a smite plus a command point on top of it. Ooh.
Well, it'd be like the mini smite, the regular smite, without the ability to do the D6 mortal wounds.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, potentially give you a CP. Potentially.
Yep.
I don't know. There's ways they could have fixed this where it would have been more utilized.
It's very cute. It's mind raid, like you're storming their mind, you're hurting them, you're getting intelligence out of them. I love the fluff of it. It's very fluffy.
It's still niche.
It's still niche, and it's kind of competing with other things.
Yeah, you're not always going to be able to utilize.
So I like it, but I don't know how competitive it is.
Yeah, it's not quite there.
Hallucination.
Yeah.
Warp charge value is 6. Select one enemy unit within 18 visible of Psyker.
Yep.
Until the start of the next sex phase, subtract 1 from the leadership characteristics of units and models in that unit. Until the start of the next psychic phase, each time a model in that unit makes an attack, subtract 1 from the attack's hit roll.
Yeah.
So you can really hinder a unit with this ability. 18, you have to get a little close. I think these are all like 18.
Yeah. Most of them are fairly close range.
18, all of them.
So this power actually used to be better in 8th edition when you were able to stack minuses to hit.
Yes.
So what you would do is you would throw this thing on, like, I'll take for example a unit of Obliterators, where you give that unit of Obliterators -1 to hit, and then you'd utilize the Raven Guards -1 to hit from their chapter tactic too. And back then, their chapter attack was 12 inches away. So now it's all of a sudden -2 to hit at 12 inches or further. And now all of a sudden your obliterators are hitting on 5s.
Yep.
Yeah, it's, at that point it becomes really effective. But, in this case, it's like, okay, well, -1, okay, sure, I guess. But the problem is you have to be too close for it to ever be super useful.
Yeah, you have to be pretty close.
And it still has the possibility of never going off, and there's a lot of factors involved in whether or not you can actually utilize it. So
There are definitely situations where like -1 to hit aren't very good.
yeah,
Like if you're hitting Necrons who have my will be done,
Right.
okay, they're already back down to a 3. What did this psychic power really do?
right,
Now with that being said, if you hit like a Leman Russ with this, or like Orcs, all of a sudden their ballistic skill becomes pretty low, and they're going to be frustrated trying to hit anything.
yeah,
So definitely in those situations, it can have a much greater effect
right.
than in others.
Yep.
So it is very niche. I don't hate it. I don't know how often I would be taking it.
Well,
compared to
if
some
you're running a
others.
Phobos librarian, it'd be worth considering. But-
It's definitely one of these better ones.
Yeah, but it's definitely not it's not one of the best ones in here. So, Temporal Corridor, that's probably my favorite one in the Obscuration Discipline. Now,
Yeah.
this allows you to essentially move a Phobos unit up to 18
so-
inches away, I think, right?
Du-du-du-du.
It's casted at 6 inches of the Psyker.
Yeah.
So what you do is use the Vanguard move from the Raven Guard. So you get your 9 inches of movement or 7 inches of movement, whatever it is, and then you cast Temporal Corridor on that unit, and now all of a sudden they can move again. And I think if I recall correctly, it can move or advance, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't make an advance roll; you just move a flat 6. So this can allow you to push out to objectives really fast, which is kind of nice.
Right.
In addition to that, you also get a normal move, and then it allows like not Vanguard veterans, but like Reavers and stuff to get up on the board really fast. So again, we were talking about earlier about how you can move Reavers up. This is a good way to do that.
So I see a lot wrong with this. It's value 5. It's easy to get off.
Yeah.
But they have to be within 6 inches. They have to be Phobos. They can't shoot or fight this turn. They can't be within engagement of the enemy.
Yeah.
And then they get a normal move.
Yeah. Well, they
I'm
can
like,
advance
this
too.
is like a really bad warp time. Is what I look at.
Yeah. Yeah. This power is specifically designed for you to be able to push out for engage on all fronts without having to roll for advances. It's good for, if you make a move and you're out in the open, now all of a sudden you can push a unit into cover pretty quickly. So there's a lot of uses for just having that extra movement, which is really nice. And that's why I like this power, especially with as easy as it is to get off. But it allows you to kind of, especially like Raven Guard, allows you to move up on the board a lot faster and kind of control areas that you really want to control. But
Yeah.
again, not being able to move, not being able to not being able to shoot, not being able to fight.
Yeah, how many things stop you from fighting?
Yeah, not too many.
Like, you get charged and like, I can't fight you because Temporal Corridor.
Yeah.
Wow, that feels bad.
Another thing that I could see this utilized on is like a unit of infiltrators as well. So if your infiltrators get put out in a position where you don't want them out to where, currently where they're at, kind of out of place, and you want to shift them around to a different side of the board real fast, you can do that. But yeah, more often than not, it's going to be like units like Reavers that would benefit from this. It's kind of a tricky one because you have to force it to work. But it can be useful for redeploying or repositioning stuff, and that's really what it's for.
I could see as someone using this to like almost great effect, like if they took the Raven Guard one where you can redeploy 3 units.
Yeah.
And then you're hitting them with like Temporal Corridor to just blitz them into position. It's like,
Right.
you were way over there a second ago, now you're over there.
Right. Yeah.
So there can definitely be advantages to those mobilities,
Yeah.
but
But you are right. I mean,
it's hoops to jump through.
there are problems with this, especially when you compare it to other things, like, for instance, Gate of Infinity. Gate of Infinity costs like 6, I think, to cast, and now you're just picking a unit up and redeploying it. This allows you to move, but when all of a sudden you can't fight, you can't shoot. Yeah, it's a problem. I don't see why they would get rid of the ability to do either one of those things,
Yeah.
because I don't think it was necessary.
No, I don't think so.
But
Like-
at the same time, the repositioning can be useful at
At
certain
least
points.
allow you to like fight. Like
Yeah.
not being able to shoot, okay, I guess, but
Yeah.
what stops you from fighting? It feels so awkward.
Yeah, it's just because they're like, they're jumping through a corridor and popping out the other side, and they don't have time to stop and think. You know what I mean?
Now you are thinking with Portal.
But, all right. Well, we can move into these, but I think we probably should start considering here. We're going to do a part 2.
Yeah,
What do we
yeah,
have?
we'll probably jump into a part 2. Yeah, kind of just
Yeah, 'cause
data sheets left.
we're not going to go over. Yeah, we're not going to go over the Crusade stuff. So, Litany's Battle Chapter Approved. I think that's probably better if we start with those next time.
Okay.
Primarily because of the fact that there are some data sheets that we're going to want to talk about that kind of play into these and how these work. So, we're going to wrap it up here. We'll come back with our part 2, playing a Litany's Battle, so that way you guys can see how chaplains work a little bit more. Obviously, I want to talk more about chaplains, of course, because they are phenomenal, especially with the new one.
Yes.
So we will be back probably within the next week or so with the part 2 of this, just kind of finishing off Space Marines, talking about all the great stuff they got. We got quite a bit of stuff left to cover. It's the data sheets, the compendium, and all that stuff that they have in there.
There's a lot of data sheets.
But in terms of the data sheets, we're probably not going to go over every single one individually.
Space Marines are Space Marines.
We'll kind of generalize and then maybe skim through a bunch of them. But yeah, I think a lot of people already kind of know mostly what they need to know about Space Marines, especially if you're interested in them already. So we'll come back with that. But again, like I said, we'll be back pretty soon with that. In the meantime, next Saturday we have a game lined up. It's going to be me and Mars playing Tau versus Sisters of Battle.
Yeah.
And we will be following that up the next week with Cade and I playing the 2 tournament armies that we took to W4 several weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that. So then we'll be playing those 2 armies. So that way you get two full weeks of Tau. You'll get to see Night Lords again. You'll get to see Sisters of Battle on the table. And then we'll finish up with Marines with the second half of the faction focus. Obviously, we appreciate you guys' support. So if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video if you guys enjoyed this, and then slap the notification bell so that way you guys get access. Well, not access, but you guys get notifications for all of our other content as well. And then of course, if you guys have any comments or anything like that you guys want to leave, or even constructive feedback. We're always kind of looking to improve the show, make things better for us, make things better for you guys. So if there's anything you'd like to see or anything you'd like to comment on, we love chatting with the community. So feel free to leave some comments, and we'll get back to you. So that's gonna wrap it up for today. But this is Cascard Studios. I'm Rick. This is Mars, and we will see you guys pretty soon.
Have a good one.
Have a good one.